authorities and the ruling entity. You know, our specificity that has been developed over the past decade in this country is as follows. Young people probably don't remember, don't know what happened in late 1990s or at the turn of the century, and they can't compare with what is happening now. And we've got lots of problems still, and we are here to talk about these problems. We will not hide or conceal anything, but at the same time, at the end of the day, our GDP has increased by 75% starting from the year 2000, and the industrial output by 60%. 75% up GDP growth, and 70% is the growth of industrial output. The processing industry grew at an advanced pace of 70% versus the 60% of the overall industrial output. The real salary now has declined a bit as a result of the crisis manifestations of the past 3 years, but starting from the early decade, the first decade of the century, it increased by 3.5 times. Real pension increased by 3.6 times, and the infant mortality got reduced by 2.6 times. The maternal mortality fell by 4 times. We lost 1 million citizens every year in the past, and we have now turned the tide. Still, we have some issues and problems in this domain, but still we have been able to reverse the tendency. And now, well, we faced 2 troughs, demographic troughs, and we'll take additional steps and measures. I'll mention them in the course of our meeting and conversation. We'll cope with them, I'm sure.
Our life expectancy used to be 65 and 3 years. Right now it's almost 73. We used to live in conditions of a civil war for quite some time. Several years, almost 6 years, or even more, almost a decade. When young fellows of 18, 19 years had to be sent against the bullets because we didn't have anything else. And right now, look at our armed forces. Our taxes have decreased threefold, whereas the country's reserves have increased by 30 times. And this has to mean something. When we're talking about the opposition, this has to be not just about some noisy politicians who talk about an anti-democratic regime. The opposition has to come up with something concrete, a proposal on how to make our life better. Of course, people are dissatisfied with many things, and indeed, it is justified, because we could have done better. But when we compare and look at the leaders of the opposition, especially the non-systemic opposition, we have doubts as to any concrete alternatives. I think the most important question of the opposition is how to come up with not a noisy agenda, but a realistic agenda, something to gain the trust of the people. And I do hope that we are going to see such an opposition emerge, and the sooner the better. We'll go on. I cannot but give the floor to Andrei Kolesnikov. 18 years has been covering the activities of the President of the Russian Federation. Well, to be more precise, 15 years, but still, it's a long time. Andrei Kolesnikov, Kommersant, newspaper. Mr. President, I've got a very quick and simple question. How and in what capacity do you want to stand for President? You can represent yourself or some social organization, a party. In other words, in what capacity are you going to run for presidency? And there are rumors that there are some differences as to who can head your electoral team. And can you name the person who is going to be the head of your electoral office, and is it important for you at all? I'm going to be self-nominated, but of course I do hope for the support of those social forces, be that parties or social organizations that share my views on the development of the country, and I do hope for their support, and I hope for the broad support of our citizens. As for the electoral team, I won't try to hide it. Yesterday we were talking about that, and so far there is no final decision. Of course, there are differences. They always do exist, where we have this wonderful, vibrant atmosphere of productive discussions. But so far, we have not yet arrived at a final decision. It is a technicality, but still it's important. Certainly, I would very much like my electoral team to be run by some authoritative people who wield respect in the country, and who just like that. Let's move to that wing. A woman in a blue blouse, no placard. Hello, my name is Maria Kravtsova, Klubs.ru from Kaliningrad Information Portal. Mr. President, on an annual basis, at the press conference or the direct line, many people come to you and they resort to you with their personal matters sometimes. Let's remember the young girl, she was very ill from hepatitis. She only was hospitalized after your direct interference. Why do you think such a great number of people think that the only solution they can find is to apply personally, directly to you? And how much time is required to address all the problems Russian citizens have through this manual management, so to speak? And a very short question, if you don't mind. It's related directly to Kaliningrad. Recently, a delegation came to Kaliningrad and a decision was made on the road from Svetlogorsk to Baltiysk. We also have a line from Svetlogorsk to Kaliningrad. Financially, it has all been resolved, but there are still some matters to be addressed. Can the federal center participate in building the last part of the Primorsky ring from Baltiysk to Kaliningrad? I think when I answered the first or the second question, I mentioned that one of my priorities, or rather priorities of the government and the state in the coming years, has to be building infrastructure, developing it. I refer in particular to airports, railroads, roads, ports, communications. And in this particular context, of course, any road building, road construction, especially in such an enclave as Kaliningrad, is going to be of paramount importance to us. You mentioned some decisions that have already been made, and I think they have to be finalized. The Primorsky ring has to be completed, as well as its branches. Otherwise, the development is not going to be fully fledged, and Kaliningrad does deserve a comprehensive development. I'm not going to tell you exactly that tomorrow, for instance, we're going to take the decision, because we've got to think about the needs of other regions as well. But we have to think about the resources we can get. When answering this question about the priority, I said that we have a number of those: infrastructure, healthcare, education, high technologies, and I reiterate that. We also want to certainly raise the incomes of our citizens. We need sources of incomes for that, and I'm going to conceal that for quite some time, almost throughout the entire year, and the last month almost on a weekly basis. We have government meetings and we talk about these sources of income. This is something we are always thinking about, and when we start to work substantively on some concrete matter, many experts come together. Even if they're liberally minded, they still agree that they thought there were sources of income, but those sources are not almost non-existent, or we cannot count on them. So once we have to talk business, not just general discussion, you see how many issues there are. You understand that sometimes your hopes are dashed, you cannot get the money you hoped for, but I'm going to give the answer to your question somewhat later, but certainly we're going to think about that. We're going to complete these programs. And now, as for the first part of your question. Oh, yes, manual management. The so-called manual management. You know, the myth of manual management is hugely overblown in regions, at the federal level, on a current basis, routinely. And I am saying that as a person who was the head of the government in the 90s and also recently before my third presidential term, you just cannot imagine how many things the government has to handle. You cannot interfere in each and every issue. You don't even have time to get immersed in that. And as for regions, you simply cannot get there because you cannot know everything. The country is so huge. And that's why we're holding this event on an annual basis. And the direct lines, however much criticized and dubbed as mere formality, they still are important. It's sort of a feedback when common citizens can get to the leadership of the country. And in that case, this manual management kicks in, which is designed to bring some system into this process. Recently, I've been meeting regularly with governors, almost always drawing their attention to the problems the citizens bring before the attention of the head of the country. But this is just a complement to the overall work of the system. Thank you. Let's go on our main state newspaper, Rossiyskaya Gazeta. Kirill Tukina, Rossiyskaya Gazeta. Mr. President, I've got a question. What is the driver for economic growth, which is so much spoken about by the government, the Minister Rushkin? It has always been spoken about, the recovery of the economy, but what are the drivers for that? Is it just changing the figures and the statistics, or are there any concrete results? Are we producing more tractors, more machines, more computers? Well, I'm looking at who can sort of complement your question. Are there any more questions on the economy? Yes? Where? Fish processing. It is a very concrete matter. We're going to get back to that. Yes. What's your question? Go ahead. Maxim Rumantsev, Free Press. Mr. President, over the last decade, 47 enterprises or projects have been blocked by non-commercial organizations that are allegedly advocating the environment, but the construction has been blocked. Billions, tens of billions of rubles have been lost. Many jobs have been lost. How can we develop in these conditions? Please introduce yourself once again. Maxim Rumantsev, and thank you for Serebranka. The road has been completed. Before the press conference, we went there, and right now it's called the Road of Putin-Rumantsev. And what's your media? The Center for Free Journalistics, Journalism, Free Press. Well, your question is mostly related to the environment, so I'll start with the first one, and then I will also try to give an answer to your question. As for the economic growth, it is growing. The economy is growing, and it is evident. There is no tweaking of the statistics. Our GDP growth is 1.6%. The industrial output is also 1.6%. The growth rate is very high, especially in the car industry, the chemistry, the pharmaceuticals. Agriculture, of course. This year, the growth rate at the end of the year is going to be almost at 3%. We've got record crops, 130.5 billion the tons, the largest crops. It's unprecedented. Even the Soviet Union didn't have such records, maybe in the 70s. And the exports are is also growing, and we are ranking first in terms of the export of grains. And these are brilliant figures. So we do have growth. But what are the drivers pushing it forward? First and foremost, we have managed to overcome two biggest shocks we underwent in 2014 and 15. First, the plummeting oil prices, which used to be the main source of our budget revenue. And secondly, external restrictions have been imposed on us, the so-called sanctions. I'm confident the sanctions didn't have the same effect as the plummeting oil prices, but still they did have some effect on our economy. We can get back to that later and talk about that in more detail. That's the first thing. Secondly, our development is increasingly dependent on domestic demand, which is very important. So we've emerged from the recession, and right now we have entered the stage of steady development. And the development is steady. Our investment in fixed capital is 2.4%. The GDP growth rate is 1.6%, but the investment, as I said, is 2.4%. So our investment is twice as big as what we're getting. So in the short term and in the midterm, we have all but guaranteed our development because we have invested money into new projects. This year, our foreign direct investment has amounted to $23 billion, which is twice as much as last year, and this is the best indicator over the last 4 years. Our inflation rate has been brought to record minimum in the history of modern Russia. As of now, it's 2.5%. The budget deficit is a mere 2.2%, and I think it's going to be even better. The finance ministry doesn't want to show us that we still can spend money. Maybe they are justified to do that. All of this is betokening a recovery of our economy. So the Ministry of Economic Development and Oreshkin were right to say that.
Now, as for technical problems, naturally they're always in place. We know that there is always an issue. It comes up everywhere, all the time. The ratio between protecting the environment and development and the right balance between them. You always have to find the middle ground for that. We already made a decision in this regard, meaning that in case when some industrial and infrastructural projects are being implemented, and that has to do, for example, with cutting down some forest, you have to have certain compensational planting of the trees. They're going to plant just as many trees that were cut down when a certain project was being built. If we are going to have this approach in solving some issues, trying to balance development and environment, I think we're going to take the right path. Now let's continue. Russia 24. Stas Natanzon, please.
Stas Natanzon, Russia 24.
Stas Natanzon, Russia 24. Thank you, Mr. President. Next year is going to be a 10-year anniversary of the motto, Stop Nightmaring the Business. Right now, small businesses are saying that all kind of civil service servants and siloviks that they want to clamp down on small businesses. Also, during such sanctions that we're under now, such approach to small businesses is probably a crime. Maybe siloviks are the fifth column and the traitors. You always wanted to make your questions really acute about traders, grab your suitcases, let's go to the railroad station and leave. You're always saying that. Does anyone else has a question about law enforcement? Well, chats are interesting. We're going to get back to this. What are you saying? prosecutor's office? Yes, someone was saying about prosecutor's office. So what's happening? The unity of central bank supervision. Please give the microphone to the lady. Good afternoon, Mr. President. My name is Natalia Nikitina. I'm economic writer for Federal Press Channel. Right now, it's an open secret that we're going to have cleaning up in the banking sphere. Central bank is very attentive to the activities both to the state and private banks. Therefore, I have a question. Why do we not hear about checks by the law enforcement in the central bank per se? Because it has very specific mandates and it has wide mandate where there may be some corruption incidents coming from central bank. Indeed, our central bank, according to the law and to the world best practices, is an independent institution. Its main mandate is not controlled by the government. The central bank is acting independently, and it makes great economic sense in terms of regulation of financial activities and oversight in banking system. We can talk about that in more detail and about my attitude towards that, what I think about it. But as for control and in observing the law in the central banks per se, this control is being done by the prosecutor's office and other institutions as well. I'll be frank, from time to time, I have certain folders coming on my table with such materials, but there was no proof to that up to this point. So I have to say that there is control in place in the central bank, and I would like to highlight once again, we did not see any serious violations of the current legislation in the work of the central bank. Up to now, we have not found such incidents. Now, as for your question about overall checks by the law enforcement, you probably do know that we have 2 years of vacation for those who are starting their own business. On the whole, this measure is working. Right now, fiscal organs are doing risk-oriented checks right now. So first and foremost, those structures are being checked that have to do with healthcare, or the most crucial infrastructural organizations, for example. The lady was right. She was talking about the prosecutor's office. The majority of the checks agreed upon with the prosecutor's office, the number of routine checks is going down, and the number of extracurricular so-called checks, there should not be more than 30% of the routine checks. Then we have a certain list of measures where we're going to have data, who is conducting the check, how often these checks are done, and what is the result of this investigation. I believe that introducing all these principles should make the whole environment of these legal checks more healthy. I believe that there could be some difficulties, but on the whole, the situation is changing for the better, in my view. A different issue is the activities of the law enforcement agencies, not the oversight agencies, but the law enforcement themselves. And here I have to agree with you. We did not see major changes for the best. That has to do with corruption at all levels, and simply with a low efficiency of the organization, lacking adequate control in this sphere. This is a difficult question, I have to be honest, and I cannot say that I am absolutely satisfied with the working routines in this sphere. You know, a year ago, I invited a director of FSB, Mr. Bortnikov, and I gave him the materials that I received through one of the channels in regard to a certain specific agency. Well, he looked at that and he said half a year ago, in this agency, we conducted investigations. We started a criminal investigation, and everyone lost their jobs, those people who were to blame. Half a year ago, we recruited new people, and then it started yet again, all this corruption. I don't know what to do with that. But as one of the possible solutions I could think of, I do not believe that we're yet prepared to introduce these measures. That has to do with financial situation and considering the residential construction situation right now. But I believe that we need rotation. In Army, we have permanent rotation principle, and this principle has been in place for decades. This is one of the difficulties of the military service, because you serve in one place for 3-5 years, and almost certainly you'll get a transfer to a different base. Maybe that would make sense to do that in the law enforcement. Maybe we could do that. I'll repeat, that has to do with providing service apartments, for example, with certain financial difficulties. But we have to think about this possible rotation principle. Maybe that would work. Maybe that could be efficient in the law enforcement sphere. Let's continue. The first channel. The first channel, 24. I think you're doing some nepotism in giving questions here. Well, about five and a half years ago, you introduced a package of orders which were called the May orders. They had to do with all kinds of spheres that had to do with military sphere, with the foreign policy, and the social sphere, of course. We were, as media, were always talking about that, and you were talking to the governors who were not doing well on these orders and in implementing them. For example, in demolishing the dilapidated residential buildings. So what kind of grade would you give yourself in implementing the May orders? Well, these May orders, if you think back, when they were just introduced, we started hearing all kinds of people crying out loud because it is too difficult to implement these orders. This is too much of a burden on the budget from all levels, because it will bring our economy down. You cannot plan such increase in salaries. This is unacceptable. I mean, salaries in the budget sphere, first and foremost, because after the budget salaries go up, it is apparent that the other salaries in the economy have to grow as well. And the labor efficiency is not growing as fast as the trend in growing salaries in the budget sphere. Well, to a certain extent, this is true. Still, I think that it would be correct and necessary. Responding to the previous question, I was saying that now economy is being based on the domestic demand and growing domestic demand. We have a decrease in real salaries of our citizens, but still, in the past, I can say that in the past year, we see the domestic trade and domestic demand bouncing back, and has grown by 1% already. And I believe that the real salaries will also be improving. If we did not have these beacons which were introduced in the May orders on the need to ensure the salary growth to teachers, doctors, teachers in universities, I believe it could be much worse. I think that both me and my colleagues did right when we outlined these target figures. On the whole, what is happening with these orders? I can say that 93-94% of the goals which were proposed were implemented. That has to do with the level of salaries in the budget sphere. I'm positive that in 2018, just as planned, we'll bring everything to its final conclusion, and I believe that we'll achieve the target goals. You were talking about dilapidated buildings. We had actually a goal to eliminate the residential buildings in the emergency state, and I believe that we almost solved this issue. I can say that sometimes these dilapidated buildings and in emergency state buildings, I believe they're quite close now. As for the emergency state, we are done with that sphere, actually. Now we have the next task to provide all children with spots in the kindergarten. I believe that we have solved this issue by 98.8%. In the beginning, when we launched this program, we had almost 500,000 children which needed to go to kindergarten, and they could not because there were no places there. Now the majority of our regions have solved this issue completely. We have several regions where we still have certain struggles. The number of children who are waiting for their spots in line is 63,000. We had more than 500,000, and now it's down to 63,000. I believe that we're going to solve this issue completely in the nearest future. So on the whole, May orders have been implemented in a satisfactory manner. Now let's go here in this sector. Pskov, please, you have the floor. No, I believe that Pskov is closer to the Arctic region. We're going to move there. Mr. President, Alina Chiban, Pskov News. Over the past 1.5 years, we have an increase of cadastral price for land. Now we have an increasing land taxes. First and foremost, that was a problem for simple people, those who live in rural area. For example, in Pskov region, land tax grew by almost 10 times, and our gardeners used to go on a strike. On the whole, this situation has not been solved. Could you please look into this matter and finally solve it?
Yes, this is really the question, and I promised to talk about the Arctics as well. So please, Arctics, you have the floor. What's happening there?
What is the problem in the Arctics? The Republican newspaper, Komi. The question about the Arctics is the following. What is your vision of the priorities of the regions in their project activities? I mean, the Northern Territories, in order to be the fundament for our state in exploring the Arctic region. So what projects are the most prospective in the framework of the Arctic strategy? So let us start with this. We have a real program on the Arctic development. What's important here is that the industrial exploration of the Arctic region, including the extraction of resources, I have already talked about it, and I'd like to cite the great scientist Lomonosov, who said that the richness of Russia is accumulated in the Siberia. I'd say that it is accumulated in the Arctic region, and exploration of those resources, of those mineral resources, should go parallel to taking care of the nature of the region, should comply with all the standards and requirements, the economic activities in the region. That's for one thing. Secondly, it's about providing for security and environmental security, military security of the region. I visited the land of Franz Josef. There were groups of foreign tourists who went there on an excursion, and they talked that those islands recently belonged to Russia. Well, apparently they have forgotten that those are Russian islands, so one should not forget about it. And finally, there is one more thing to it. We should not forget about the interests of the small-numbered indigenous peoples of the north. That's very important. We should not violate their traditional economic interests. And if anything contradicts with the implementation of big nationwide projects, the measures should be presented to somehow compensate for it. So this is a complex task, and we'll consider it in such a manner. And finally, the second question, which is very important not only for Pskov, but for other regions of the Russian Federation as well, nearly for all the regions. First of all, it is the case in the whole world that the owners, that the property owners pay for it, they pay taxes. That goes without saying. Whereas cadastre price as the market price, and that is also correct. But what is incorrect is the tariff levels of cadastre payments. They should be based on some real indicators. They should be based on the real income of the population. They cannot be parted from reality. It cannot be the case that, as in 1990s, we put in the so-called shock therapy. So we're not going to have to blame those who take the corresponding decisions. And at the beginning of this way, people well often paid attention to this, but the organizers of the process always talked that the decisions will be balanced. What you've said proves that the decisions failed to be balanced. We have subsidized categories that make an extract from their property that amounts to 10,000 rubles, but those lots in many regions of the country cost much more than 10,000 rubles. You've mentioned about Pskov. What should we say then about Moscow and Leningrad regions, and about other regions of the Russian Federation that are formed around the megalopolises? So I think that in the near future, and I'm very thankful to you for this question, I will task the government so that they, together with the members of parliament, take a decision according to which all the subsidized categories of the population who receive this 10,000 discount, that they should get this subsidy in some real indicator, and that they should not pay for those lots at all. Add to this, but I think that it is not sufficient. Add to this that we should extend this list and include all those who have pension already, because they already have subsidies because of their flats and their houses. So the extension of this list will be logical and it will be fair. The state will not be damaged from it. Mr. President, do not criticize me, but I cannot but give the floor to Mr. Brylov, Russia TV channel. Just a moment. Good afternoon, Sergei Brylov, Russia TV channel. We understand that the major part of the questions today relates to the domestic policy. We saw the green folder that you had at the meeting with the governors. I'd like to ask you about the international situation before the current situation. The fundament of the international relation also already started to deteriorate. The Americans left the agreement on counter-missile defense. Later on, the thing happened with the agreement on mid and long-term range missiles. If we talk about it further, what about the agreement on START? Will it lead to a new arms race? Will it damage the social payments that we have to discuss today? We have not left any of the fundamental agreements that were benchmarks in the international security. We did not leave the missile defense agreement. The United States did it unilaterally. Now we also had some problems with the agreement with Inf Treaty. In the current situation, we have information and propaganda activities, probably for the United States to leave this treaty as well. As a matter of fact, they have already done it. Now they try to reprimand us. But what did they do themselves? They deployed allegedly missile defense systems in Romania, but how did they do it? They deployed Aegis systems, which they transported from seas, and they deployed them there. But such systems can be substituted with missile defense systems or with systems to launch missiles. So the process has already started, as a matter of fact. And if we continue like that, it will not lead to anything good. But as for us, we are not going to secede from the treaties and from the agreements. As for the START treaty, we have already heard from the United States that they're not interested in it any longer. It has been spoken about that if this is the case, and if the United States take another action to unilaterally leave an agreement, this will be very bad for the international security state. Now, our military expenses. We see those processes, we understand what it will probably lead to, and will ensure our security without launching another arms race. This second part of the question, could you please give the microphone once again? Will the rise in military expenses lead to the decrease in social expenses? Well, you know, the military expenses are balanced by several factors. First of all, we have to provide for our security, and secondly, we have to make it in such a way so as not to ruin our economy. So for the next year, for example, we have foreseen our military expenses of 1.4 trillion to purchase and 1.4 for keeping. So 2.8 trillion all in all. I've given you concrete figures. If we calculate, given the existing rate, it's about 46 and something billion USD. Now we have already signed a law. Now they have already signed a law on military expenses of 700 billion US dollars. So we have somewhat about 46, they have 700. So think about it. Can we afford such expenses? No. It's enough for us to spend those 46 billion. One can say that even 46 is too much, but, well, you know, we have a joke that those who do not want to feed their own army will feed somebody else's army. This is an old joke, you know. Sometimes I give you some. I can give you another. It's also quite an old one, but still it's a little bit more modern than the previous. A son of a former officer comes up to him, and the officer asks, well, you know, I had a dagger here. Haven't you seen it? The son says, well, I have exchanged it for a watch. The father takes a look at it and says, this is a good watch. And then he says, just imagine tomorrow some robbers come to us. I'm killed. Your mother is killed. Your sister is raped. Then you come in front of them and say, hello, Moscow time is 12:36. So we do not want such a thing to happen, do we? That's why we'll pay all the necessary attention to the development of army and fleet, without starting a new arms race and without ruining our budget. I suggest a combined version. We had children about the future in the right sector, and we have TV children here in the central sector. They take part in the conference for several years in a row already, so let us start one by one. Thank you. My name is Marina Valinkina, internet portal, Talented Children. I will have another joke. Indeed, 3 years ago we had a very, very gifted child. Oh, thanks God. This is a joke, naturally, but because at 2014 you supported the creation of a nationwide internet portal, Одаренные дети, well, the gifted children, which is supported by you today. We have organized a wonderful event, and the children send greeting to you from 85 regions of Russia. So there was a competition of essays, Russia in the future, and we defined 7 nominations in this event. Then we received 2,500 essays from children on Russia's future. On the 19th of January, the Federation Council will congratulate those children. And now comes the question. Do you want to hear the answer from those gifted children about their vision of the future Russia? Do you want it? Well, we can make it, but do you suggest bringing them here now? No, on the 19th of January. Just do visit the awards ceremony for those talented children, and then they will tell you about their vision of the Russia's future. Okay, I'll try to make it. Thank you. Thank you for your work and for your proposal. My name is Arina Zhukova, and I have Kirill Senik. He's my colleague. We represent the internet channel TV Detki from St. Petersburg. Could you please tell us about the ways the government supports the talented children and how it plans to do it in future? Does it cooperate with the culture activists and the art activists in this question? Is there an understanding of who those children are going to be in future? If now they receive an investment in the form of money and effort. Also, we know that there is a children camp Sirius, which was organized following your initiative, which accepts talented children from all over the Russia. But what should the children do that are not less talented, but who failed to get to this camp? Are those children also worked with? Thank you. Get seated, please. First of all, as regards the work with the talented children, with children just on the whole, I have already said it, and I'd like to repeat. I think that all the children, without an exception, are talented, and it's the task for parents and for teachers to disclose this talent.
So it's about unlocking the talent. It's not just lip service, you know. The cognitive scientists have been conducting investigations and research in here and abroad. And you've mentioned the Sirius camp, which is indeed a center of dealing with talented kids. And next to this Sirius premises at the former media center territory, it's like huge area. So upon my behest, we want to create world-class research labs there on ICT, on biology and genetics, and on cognitive sciences, with a special focus on ways and means of dealing with talented kids and youths, and means and ways to unlock their talents. So, from the academic and research perspective, we will keep toiling. And in practical terms, apart from Sirius, we have Artek and Ocean and Orleanic camps in the North Caucasus. But this is not it. Quantoriums and children's technology parks are being established countrywide, and students' games. What is the aim? The aim is to accompany children in the course of their education career and up to the employment. If we come back to the serious camp, I must mention that apart from this world-class laboratory that we will see, there is a 30-hectare land plot next to it for technology parks, and Sirius, the world-class labs and the technology parks in a single cluster to commercialize the outcome of the research by the research fellows, and the cream of the crop from academia and teaching profession work with them, and advanced training for school teachers is carried out there, a special course for them to enroll, and I would like this to become a countrywide, nationwide network, and this is becoming a reality now. So, pension age, retirement age, yeah, please proceed. In a second, the army will follow in a second. Okay, coming. Please speak up. Hello, Mr. President. Zofia Sultanova, Chulma newspaper, Chulma Izvestia. The talk is rife of the past year about the raising of the retirement age, so it's a matter of time, which is clear when the decision is to be made. And do you think what shall be the increase of the retirement age for men and women? You know what? You have... Please sit down. Take a seat. You have touched upon a very sensitive, a very important issue. I will not cite the final decisions now. They are yet to be designed and crystallized. But you say the decisions have been made. You know what? The proponents of raising the retirement age keep saying that this bar was set in the 1930s. 55 for ladies and 60 years for men, which is the current retirement age. And the life expectancy was more or less of the same duration back then, strange as it might seem. Currently, all the European countries and all the neighbors of ours, like Belarus and Kazakhstan, all of them, and Ukraine as well, all of them have made up their minds to raise the retirement age. Only us are left. And the proponents of raising, the advocates of raising the retirement age have been saying that if we don't do that, given the greater and longer life expectancy, the working age population will be dwindling and the retirees will become more numerous and will not be able to balance properly our pension system, which doesn't mean that we will not pay pensions. We shall pay pensions. We'll have no calamity or disaster or failure to pay. But the incomes of the pensioners will go down as the inflation proceeds, because their incomes will be frozen, or put on halt. So some people say that the bar should be uniform for men and women, and now currently women at 55 give birth to children. God give them health. Let me finish, please, let me finish. But there are some other people saying that we may face problems in case the retirement age is raised. What have they been invoking and citing? They've been saying that we want to lend an innovative nature to our economy. We want the digital technology to have the center stage. What does that mean? It means that the real manufacturing and industry in our economy, now, like applying 1,000 employees, tomorrow they will need no more than 100 people per factory. And if we postpone the retirement till a later age, what shall happen to those free people, to the free manpower that has been made redundant at factories? So there are different sets of considerations, and we have to make our reckoning and proper calculations. I'm not saying to dodge your answer. No, I mean that we really need to make our calculations. But anyway, no matter what the option is, it will not refer to those who have already retired. And second, it should not be a shock decision, a one-off decision. We should see a gradual, an incremental process, like in half a year or in 1 year's time. But I reiterate, as of today, no final decision has been made. And one more important circumstance, such decisions cannot be taken privately, even at the cabinet level. This should be an open public procedure with the participation of the broad public, and we should have an open debate in Parliament. Mr. President, probably some sports. Let us combine the themes. I saw Sovietsky Sport and Match TV, and probably assign Rodchenkov and his life in Russia, which is kind of anti-sports in nature of the slogan. Let's start with Match TV, and first be concise. I beg you. Olga Bogoslovskaya, Match TV. Mr. President, my question relates to the sports, the International Olympic Committee issue and the World Anti-Doping Agency. How do you see communication with these entities and organizations? And the situation is indeed quite tense. What do you think is a way out of this situation? Myself and some of my colleagues have said that for us it's obvious that this scandal has been found in the view of the Russian political cycle turn, and no matter what they say, I'm convinced it is like this. I know that. But at the same time, and that has been uttered on many occasions, it's our fault we gave them a pretext, because real cases of use of doping, of application of doping, have been identified, though in other countries too, but there is no politicized hype in those countries about these manifestations. So in here it has political underling and intricacies, but as a matter of fact, the decision to take some of the drugs prohibited for others on medical conditions after an operation having been performed, or because of the inborn diseases, some athletes are authorized to do so, so they, in this case, receive competitive advantages. Some people can use these medications, others can't. So probably they should have a separate competition procedure, because everybody has been exerting efforts and everybody merits respect. But anyway, we should maintain the fair competition. How we shall deal with WADA and IOC, I think in a constructive manner. I hope we'll eliminate all the problems, all the issues, resolve them, upholding the interests of our athletes, including civil courts. I know that some of the international sports officials don't want that, but anyway, we will have to go to civil courts to help our athletes uphold their dignity and honor. Please pass the mic over there. Afternoon, Oleg Rulye, World and Politics magazine. Mr. Rodchenkov in 2011 was involved in a criminal case of illegal trade in doping. He was accused, and he guaranteed that the athletes would not perform any doping. He tried to commit a suicide. Being drunk, he stabbed himself with a knife. Afterwards, the forensic expertise and test found he had some psychiatric disease, some schizophrenic disorder, and afterwards some of the strange things happened. All of a sudden, he turns to be a witness. But please be concise. Out of 12 episodes, only one is afloat, and he once again heads Rosada. Will there be an investigation of that criminal trial of the past and why it has been resumed, and why has he become witness instead of an indicted person? And how can someone trafficking doping could have had the Russian anti-doping agency? Will you identify these people who made the decisions and castigate them? You know, this is a justified question. A person who lived in North America for several years and came back, well, there is nothing untoward that he headed the agency, but the fact that he was accused of spreading doping practices and his sister was convicted, receiving 1.5 years imprisonment, which is strange for me with my special services background, is that he brought all those ugly things, ugly drugs from the North America and Canada, from US and Canada, despite all the stringent border control procedures. It has been a mistake indeed, without a doubt, a mistake by those structures and people who brought him there. One shouldn't work with people who try to commit a suicide on all grounds. It means they have some issues with their psychology. But, you know, one should not base the decisions citing the testimony of these people either. The justification of the International Olympic Committee upon their verdict says that he, number one, is an honest person, and number two, he's under the FBI supervision and protection. And third, that everything is in his diaries, which is nonsense. Who said he's an honest person? He faced trial before. He was brought to court, and he has been saying on many occasions that money matters most for him. Second, he's under the supervision and protection of FBI. For us, it is a con, not a pro, which means he's under the control of the American Special Services. Probably they inject some medicines and administer some medicines to him so that he should say something they want. And third, everything is in his diaries, the IOC said. But when was that spelled out? We don't know that. Nothing more. A scratch on those tubes. But we had a certificate, acceptance certificate, and no claims were set forth against us. No more real cogent evidence. We treat international sports organizations and entities with respect, like WAR and IOC, who have lots of friends there, but they feel the pressure being put upon them. They are being intimidated, no matter what people may say after these words of mine. It is the truth, it's the case.
But if they do something, they still have some objective grounds upon which the decision is to be made. Otherwise, it's... You see? Now, as for how this man came to stand at the helm of our anti-doping structure, yes, that's the mistake of those who did that. I know who did that. Yes, Soviet sport, but please be very brief. Nikolai Yeremenko, Soviet sport, were the oldest media, and I know that you've got a subscription, Mr. President. We all know very well that Russia knows how to organize large-scale sport events, and the Olympic Games in Sochi are a testimony to that. Even if we're somewhat falling behind, we still managed to finalize everything in time. Next year, we're having one of the largest sports events in the World Cup, and we do hope that everything is going to be held at the highest level. But we've been accustomed that large cities like Moscow, St. Petersburg, Kazan, Sochi have the experience of holding and hosting such large-scale events. But many events are going to take place in cities where foreigners are like something exotic. Are there going to be problems or not? No doubt we have a very good experience of hosting very big, very important international sports events, and competitions, which I'm not going to enumerate, not to waste our time. The Confederation Cup was held at the highest level. For us, it is very important that FIFA inspectors accompany the whole process of preparation for the World Cup. Everything is going according to plan and schedule. But out of 12 stadiums which have to be built in 11 cities, 2 in Moscow, are going according to plan. One place is lagging behind by 2 months, but everything can be brought in order and everything is going to be done at the highest quality level. There's something I'd like to underscore. Less than half of the expenditure is covered from the budget, whereas more than half of all expenditure come from private hands. The government funds, just as in the run-up to the Olympic Games, are going to be spent on building infrastructure such as railroads, branches, airports, railway stations, and so on and so forth. I'm confident everything is going to be done on time and at a high level of quality. Thank you. Mr. President, we didn't hear from foreigners. ABC News, please. I suggest, if you don't mind. We didn't. Just a moment, please. Thank you.
Terry Moran with ABC News. First, in the United States, investigations by Congress, the Department of Justice, and the media have uncovered a very large number of contacts between Russian citizens associated with your government and high officials of the Trump campaign. And some of those officials are now being prosecuted for lying about those contacts. All this is not normal, and many Americans are saying where there's that much smoke, there must be fire. How would you explain to Americans the sheer number of contacts between the Trump campaign and your government? And second, if I may, it's almost been a year since Donald Trump has been elected president. You praised Donald Trump during the campaign. What is your assessment of Donald Trump as president after 1 year? Spasiba.
Well, let me start from the second part of your question. It is not up to me to give an assessment of how President Trump is doing. It is up to the American citizens, those who elected him. Objectively, we see some serious achievements accomplished even during short span he is president. Look at the markets, how they've grown. This attests to the trust investors show in the American economy. They have trust in what President Trump is doing in this particular field. You know, with all due respect for the opposition of President Trump's opposition within the U.S., it is an evident fact. I believe there are some things President Trump would like to do, but so far he's been unable to, such as the health care system reform, some other avenues. He also had spoken about trying to improve relations with Russia in his foreign policy. Evidently, even if he had wanted that, so far he was unable to do that due to the restrictions you are well aware of. You have to ask him if he still wants to do that, or maybe it's over. I do hope he wants to improve relations with Russia, and in the end, it is in the interests of the American people and the Russian people, and I do hope that we'll normalize our relations, we'll develop together, we'll overcome joint threats which are well known, such as terrorism, addressing the environmental issues, fighting the spread of WMDs, overcoming of crises in different regions of the world, including the Middle East, the issue of North Korea. There are many things which we can address far more efficiently if we pool our efforts together, more efficiently than right now. I think that's it. Yes.
I see.
You know, all of this has been invented, made up by people who are in opposition to President Trump. with a view to shedding a negative light on what President Trump is doing. And for me, it is very bizarre. It's as if they were doing that without understanding one simple fact. By doing that, the people who are responsible for that, dealing a blow to the internal political environment of the country. And they restrict, they impede what President Trump is doing. That means they do not respect those who voted for Mr. Trump. And how do you imagine that? The electoral process all across the world. Do you suppose any contacts with foreign powers have to be prohibited? Our ambassador was accused of meeting someone, but it is just common universal practice when diplomatic representatives or even members of the government meet all candidates, their teams, talk about some issues, the prospects for development, try to understand what this or that person is going to do if he or she arrives in power, how to respond to that. So what's wrong with that? That someone has decided to fuel this espionage campaign and spy fever. Just look at the investigations in the social networks, the advertisements of our companies account just for, I don't know, a meager fraction, whereas American companies account for hundreds of % of all the advertisements shown in social networks. So this is incomparable, and still they think that our advertisements are excessive. It is just absurd. Or look at our media, such as Russia Today or Sputnik, their share and the overall information pool is negligible, just minuscule as compared to what the Western media, the American media are doing, especially in Russia, and they see our media as a threat. And where did the freedom of press go? Isn't it one of the cornerstones of the American democracy itself? I believe all of us have to understand. Some do one thing better, others other things. And we've got to make conclusions and just go forward without trying to be at one another's throats like some animals. We have to think about that. I suggest we should move to another wing. Tariffs, please. Thank you. Lilia Akinshina, Tevets. I've got an economic question about the monetary policy of the central bank. You have told us about the record minimum of inflation rate. The key interest rate is going down, albeit slowly, and yet the central bank has come under criticism. One of the main economic trends of this year was targeting of inflation, and there were many skeptics who thought that it was impossible to bring it down, and yet the central bank has brought it down. And some economic scientists say that what's good for ordinary citizens, such as the low growth of prices, still they say that it is not good for the overall economic state. Do you think the policy of inflation targeting has yielded all the results that it was supposed to? What about the complaints about lack of free money and lending? Inflation targeting is the right thing to do. If we want our economy to be a healthy one, to have trust among investors, then it has to be an integral part of our policy. We've got to have a well-balanced fiscal policy as well as a good monetary policy for which the central bank is responsible. Can one understand the criticism coming from business circles? Yes, it is understandable. Certainly they want more lending and at a lower interest rate. But what we have to guarantee is that this process is cautious, not too excessive. We don't want any bubbles emerging in our economy when there is a lot of cheap money which is invested in enterprises that do not have many chances of success, and do not produce goods that are in demand, then otherwise it's going to be the problem. Let's have a look at what was happening. Last year, the central bank reduced the interest rate twice, from 12 to 10%. This year, the interest rate was brought down on 5 occasions. Right now, it stands at 8.25%. The central bank has already talked about its goal. Next year, they want to bring it down to 6 or 7% by 2020, rather. The decrease of the interest rate certainly is not the only thing. They also want to bring down the interest rate for commercial banks, for non-financial organizations. So it's around 10.08%, but it's bigger for small and medium enterprises. It stands at 13 to 14%. What else is the central bank doing? A decision has been made to restructure the banking sector, to restructure those who've got a general license to work with big business, with big partners. Their equity capital has to be no less than 1 billion, and those who've got a basic license have to have no less than 300 million. And these particular banks are supposed to be working with small and medium enterprises, especially in the Russian regions. Up until now, in our economy, we still have many banks, 521 banks. It doesn't mean that we've got to asphyxiate all of them. It would be pernicious. But still, we've got to make our economy healthier in the interests of our clients. And that is very important. So, amid fluctuations in world markets, against the backdrop of internal difficulties, we would hate our clients to come up against issues that cannot be resolved. And there are 2 tracks we are pursuing in order to resolve the banking sector: the Deposit Insurance Agency and also a newly established fund. That's the second instrument we're resorting to. I think this latter fund is very important. And why is that? It's because when banks are resolved through this fund, as already decided, the credit resources got from the banks by the proprietors, the managers, are sort of bracketed. So people who've brought the bank to a bad situation, they don't get any money from it any longer. And that's a good thing. I hear the criticism against the central bank, and sometimes there are people who say that through its actions, the central bank is sort of nationalizing the banking sector, but that is not the case. We've got, as I said, around 500 banks, but there are other lending institutions, because the banks are not the sole lending institution. And the central bank also says that even if it takes something, it does it with a view to subsequently privatizing it. And we believe that the process is going to develop in this particular vein. Let's not shout. I heard there was something about agriculture. What did you want to ask about?
Agriculture, please. Give the microphone. Mr. President, please introduce yourself. Yelena Ogana, Novosibirsk. Siberians this year has gathered a record crop of grains, but it seems that no one wants it, because the state this year decided to make no interventions in this sphere. The storage facilities are still filled with the grain from the previous years, and it's very difficult to transport it outside of the region, because we are in the middle of the country. We can transport it to Vladivostok or to Novorossiysk. It's still expensive. And the agricultural sector is incurring major losses. They're selling grain at half price because it's so expensive to export it. Right now, Siberians are prepared to diversify their agriculture. They're prepared to sow something else apart from grain. But it's very difficult to understand what the country needs today, what will be needed tomorrow. Maybe we should go back to state planning. Maybe there are any other options. when the farmers will have record grains and record prices then? What do you mean the half price? So this price, what kind of price is that? Is that the price that the producer wants to receive, or is that the market price? What is a market price then? No doubt, grain producers require assistance. It can be done in many ways, either through state procurements, and we cannot rule that out. We have to think about it. Maybe the government thinks that it's not reasonable, but we can think about it. But what we agreed with the government, that we're talking about subsidizing railroad transportation. I cannot say whether the final decision has been made, but it must be made, and it has to do with the different transportation and the export in particular. Let's move to the center, Gazeta.ru. Gazeta.ru, Rustem Elyakov. I have also an economic question. Mr. President, out of your answers, I have this picture that sometimes you're misinformed about the situation in the economy. I have a tax question, and I want to hear a more realistic answer, whether the taxes are going to increase in 2018, whether it will continue to increase. Right now, businesses and citizens are completely sure that the authorities are taking a pause before the elections, and it's clear, but otherwise taxes are growing, and they continue to do that indirectly and behind the closed door, so to speak. So what is going to be happen in reality with taxes after the elections? Well, I cannot agree with you that someone is trying to deceive someone about taxation. Well, talking about the burden, including the non-tax burden, that is true. It is increasing. I have already gave my instructions to make a detailed analysis of what is happening in the regions, because this is first and foremost happening in the regions. We will do that, and indeed in the future we're going to create a certain environment which will hinder such runaway, uncontrolled growth of fiscal burden. And for businesses, you're completely right. It doesn't matter what kind of tax do you pay or non-tax. It still comes out of your pocket if you're a business. Secondly, as for the tax per se, we agreed that the taxes per se till the end of 2018 are not going to increase. On the whole, we're keeping that. Maybe we can argue about some ideas here, but on the majority of taxes, we have this situation in place. Starting with 2019, what will happen? I already spoke about it, answering a certain question before. We have outlined healthcare, high-tech, strengthening military fleet, and all these spheres that I have already mentioned. We have that as priorities, and right now we need growth drivers. We need to see where we can get resources, what can be fine-tuned in a taxation system so that everything works for the main development goals for the economy in the country. What kind of taxation maneuvers we need to make to alleviate the burden on the spheres which we have planned as advanced development spheres. I think this is a premature discussion right now, because first we need to have this conversation at an expert level, and after we have made a decision, it should be introduced for a discussion with the business community. We'll do that. We're not going to have that behind the closed doors, just like any other issues, for example, the retirement age. But what we need to pay attention to today and right now is that there are certain taxes which are quite a heavy burden for the citizens and for businesses. And they're not in line with interests of the businesses or the citizens themselves, or the state interests, for that matter. For example, capital renovation, or for example, taxation debt, which was accumulated over many years. for some reasons that have nothing to do with the person. For example, the imperfections in our taxation systems. This taxation debt are targeting about 42 million people, and we're talking about 41 billion rubles on the whole. Maybe someone will be cursing me here, and I mean my liberal opponents, but we should start with these payments, and it has to be done without red tape, without the person going to the revenue service. Second, we need to do the same thing for the individual entrepreneurs. This is also about 15 billion rubles. About 2.9 million people are having trouble with that. Maybe a person started a business, something did not work out, but he's still incurring taxes, and we have to alleviate this burden. Okay, hold on a second. You showed thumbs up, and I know that you welcome that. And I think that this is the right thing to do. Now, the third thing. We need to build the system to stimulate taxpayers, for them not to be afraid. Even if they fell behind the deadline, they still would not be fined, for example, for that. This should not be a very strict system, though we do need taxation discipline. There is yet another issue. We're talking about the so-called conditional income. For those who don't know, what is this? For example, banks exempting someone from paying out credits, or some communication service providers are also exempt. This is a conditional income, and they're being taxed for that. And this is also about 3 million people. And we're talking about billions of rubles in debt, and we need to write it off, because this is absolutely a useless thing which hinders development in the economy. This is also an unjust taxation burden for some people, and I think we'll do that in the nearest future. Now, let's move on to this sector. Ufa, please. I see Ufa being there. Please give the microphone to the man.
Добрый день,
Stanislav Shachov, Ufa, social electronic newspaper. I would like to continue the taxation topic. Every region has trouble getting federal funds. For example, Bashkiria receives 100 billion rubles, and then it can manage 50 billion in the budget, and then the delegations come out to Moscow to get some more funds. Do you think it would make sense to overhaul the taxation system for the regions to receive more of their revenue? For example, since 2010, regions received up to 5% from mineral resources. Maybe that would allow to have a more efficient introduction of the budget, so that the roads could be repaired on time, for example. Yes, I believe that this is necessary. I will not go into detail on these specific decisions. We have been discussing these issues. We came back to this last week, actually. We were talking about road construction. We were talking about income, the revenue for the regions. You know, we have made a decision on the restructuring of the regional debt. Does anyone else have this question on the regional debt? Does anyone have that? Yes, please, let's listen. So I would like to combine these two questions. Veliky Novgorod, Yelena Nagatina, internet newspaper, Your News. We're talking about the regional debt. As a matter of fact, our region is no exception, and we need money for social payments, for healthcare, and unfortunately for other services as well. The Veliky Novgorod debt stands about 2 billion rubles, which is the whole revenue. So I would like to know, we, such regions, how can we survive? So we'd like to live without making a budget of despair. I would like to have a budget of opportunity. How to find a balance between the so-called donor regions and the regions which need to be subsidized, how to get this balance for people to live equally well. So maybe this restructuring, could that be one of the options how to solve these issues? And Mr. President, this is my civil duty. I have been dealing with 3 years with underfinanced school and preschool facilities. I would like to give you the photos of the real conditions in the kindergartens. We'll get that after the press conference. Thank you. Hold on a second. I have to respond to this question. Indeed, this is in line with what we heard from Ufa and from Novgorod as well. Now, as for donor regions and for recipient regions, we believe that people, wherever they live on the territory of Russia, they have to live in certainly medium conditions. It is very hard to achieve. Regions were developing in different fashion for different reasons, but people who live in the regions where the budget is not sufficient, they're not to blame for that. So over many years, what we have been doing, we have been trying to even out this budget income and revenue. And indeed, money has been, the country has been investing a lot of money in some regions, including in some regions where which are now recipient states. Still, we're taking some resources from them. Right now, we have 12 donor regions. Maybe, indeed, we have the distribution system for other regions. We're going to do this very carefully without undermining the desire of the donor regions to develop their economy in the future. Now, as for restructuring of the debt, I have already talked about it, and I think the government has publicized their decisions. We have made a decision to restructure the debt for 7 years, the credit, the lending debt of almost all regions of the Russian Federation. The term is 7 years, 5% interest rate. Right now, the regions which are going to increase taxation base at a rate no lower than inflation, they're going to have a extended period for 12 years. And that would allow the regions to receive and accumulate sum of 430 billion rubles. And that is going to be for improving health of the system, for economic and financial development. And I think that's extremely important, and that all regions were very enthusiastic about it, including Novgorod region.
Such regions as the Novgorod region will receive additional assistance. I'd like to underline it, additional assistance apart from what I have already described. We don't have many regions that require additional assistance, 3 or 4 of them, but Veliki Novgorod is included. This assistance will also be measured by billions of rubles. What is very important to my mind, this decision has not been made yet. I have not discussed it with the government, but we have to stop unlimited growth of lending of regions of the Russian Federation in commercial banks, to stop making them have to lend under a very high interest rate. There is an opportunity to make the interest rate less, but they do not do it, and there is a question, probably there is a compliance between the commercial banks and regional authorities. There are certain parameters according to which commercial banks do not give money to business structures, but they do give money to the regionals despite their debts in crediting, because they know that they're provided by the state. That's why they take those loans and do not think about the after effects. That is why we'll have to limit it. I repeat that I have not discussed it with anyone yet. You are the first to hear this idea from me. That's what we'll have to do. Let us take the central sector, Associated Press. Thank you. Is it on? If I may, I will also make my question in English.
Wants Russia to do more to persuade North Korea to halt its missile programs. Would Russia support tougher sanctions against North Korea? And do you think that cooperation on North Korea could warm up US-Russia relations, or have you lost hope of mending them under Mr. Trump? Thank you.
Интересные вы ребята.
You are so interesting, you know. Haven't you paid attention to the fact that your congressmen, senators, they look so good, they're beautiful, they have suits and shirts. They seem to be clever people, but they put us in one line with North Korea and Iran, but at the same time they try to make the president decide the issues of North Korea and Iranian nuclear program together with us. Is it okay? This is weird. I think it's beyond any common sense. But our policy, unlike the policy of some other countries, is void of current political conditions. We try to cooperate with everybody in terms of international security. We try not to be offended because of some obscure decisions. But as for the North Korea, our position is well known. We do not recognize the nuclear status of the North Korea. We think that everything that's happening in the country is counterproductive. I have already spoken about it, and I'd like to repeat. In 2005, it was almost agreed with North Korea that it suspends its nuclear program. It took on certain obligations, but several months, and everyone agreed to those treaties, but several months later it all of a sudden seemed to the United States that those agreements were not enough. So the North Korean accounts were arrested, and it was proclaimed that North Korea has to do something else that lies beyond this agreement. But then North Korea seceded from all the agreements and treaties and continued to develop its nuclear program. So why did you do it? Did it seem that it was too little? I think that North Korea was provoked to secede. And later it grew worse. Libya and Iraq, I have multiply spoken about it. North Korea sees no other way to preserve itself, any other way but a way of developing their missile techniques. Now, apparently, they have a situation where their missiles can reach the territory of the United States. There's nothing good about it. We think that the situation should stop deteriorating and it should be done bilaterally. We have heard from the United States, for example, that they're going to stop their exercises, but then they changed their mind. They conducted military exercise, North Korea launched another missile, and so on and so forth. So this spiraling up should be stopped. We have talked to our American partners. Even if we suppose that the United States launch some strikes, even by non-nuclear missiles. So what will be the aim of this strike? Does CIA know which goal should be crushed by this strike? No, you don't know, because North Korea is a closed country. You know something about it, but there are main things that you do not know. Whereas for the North Korea, it is enough to make just one launch in order to provoke catastrophic after effects. Well, yes, the United States once used nuclear weapons against Japan, and it was not well reasoned to my mind. Now Mr. Tillerson has said that the United States stands ready for direct contacts, and this is a good signal. This shows that the American leadership and the State Department are finally understanding what's going on, probably together with Pentagon. If we proceed like this, if we proceed from the common sense, we will cooperate with the United States on all the tracks, including the issue of the North Korea. We have Bashkiria, and in my understanding, Ukraine is not far from it. So please, Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you for an opportunity to ask a question. I will dare to correct you. Ukraine and Bashkiria are very far from each other. We are well acquainted with the Burat Republic. There is only one actual problem. You do not answer all the questions. Earlier on, you never try to conceal that you send people to Donbass to solve military issues. As a matter of fact, it means to kill the Ukrainian citizens. And, well, we know what to do with your deciders. But some of them get imprisoned, they are taken hostage, and some of them have a lifelong freedom penalty. So now your tenure is going up to an end, and in case you are not re-elected, don't you want to exchange your citizens, and we want to get back our hostages, 65 of them, not only Sushenka, but dozens of Tatars from the Crimea. And if you win the elections, which will probably happen, will you still keep this absurd position relating to Donbass and to peacekeepers? And in practice, the people who are deployed there, they are actually performing a massacre in Donbass, and such cities as Slavyansk and Mariupol, so that cities of Slavyansk and Mariupol can live peaceful life. And another question, related one. Elena Glushakova, RIA Novosti Agency. My question is also about Ukraine. I'd like to add, the situation with the implementation of Minsk Agreement seems to be catastrophic. Are they still working for the implementation, for the settlement of this conflict? And finally, Russia on a regular basis meets with US representatives about Ukraine, but as a matter of fact, US is not a part of Normandy 4. Probably it would make sense to include them, to make them the 5th member of the Normandy 4. And if I may, one more question about the Ukrainian politician, Mr. Saakashvili. What do you think his fate will be in the future of Ukraine, and what is the perspective of the development of the situation in the country? First of all, about the Minsk format and its effectiveness and efficiency, it is not sufficient. First of all, it is because of non-constructive position of the current Kyiv authorities. They do not show any willingness to implement Minsk agreements or any willingness to start a real political process which could be finished with the implementation of an agreement about Donbass special status, which is enshrined in a special law of Ukraine adopted by Verkhovna Rada, but this law was not enacted yet because of several reasons, and the parameters of this law are well known. Then the United States. As a matter of fact, they are full-fledged members of the settlement process, despite of the fact that they are not formally included in the Normandy format. They're very deeply involved, and they know about all the ongoing events. It does not depend on us whether to include them into Normandy 4 or not. I have never been against it anyway. And then the question, or rather position explained by a colleague. First of all, I'd like to comment on the geographical positioning of Ukraine and Bashkiria. Taking into account that you spoke very clear Russian, not without any accent, judging by this, I can say that Bashkortostan is not that far from Ukraine as you may seem, as you may think. Finally, what's happening in Donbass is really a tragedy, and here I cannot but agree with you. And first of all, we have to look at the background and at the reason of this tragedy. It was a coup d'etat and unauthorized capturing of the authority. And despite Ukraine's willingness to end up in the European civilization, they started to combat with all who disagree with what happened there, using force and using the military. In Donbass, there are special military formations that are sufficient in order to stop any large-scale military actions against Donbass. We think that it complies with the interests of those who reside in those areas, because if they don't have such an opportunity, the massacre that you mentioned, and even worse than in Srebrenica, would be carried out by the so-called nationalist battalions. And they would not be stopped by anything, including by our address to international human rights organizations, as some of my Western partners recommended. Finally, as regards the Peacekeeping Mission, Mr. Poroshenko talked about the need first to arm the OSCE personnel. I agreed to this, but OSCE refused. They said they didn't have such expertise, the trained personnel, and that they didn't want to carry arms because in such a case they would become goal for the militarized groups. Finally, Mr. Poroshenko said that the security of OSCE members should be provided at the expense of UN mission. We agreed, and in order not to raise any doubts that we agree, we introduced a draft resolution that would suggest deploying UN mission that would protect OSCE. After that, in a telephone talk with Angela Merkel, she told me, why should it be done only at the contact line? Because OSCE personnel moves around the whole territory of Donbass. Then you should agree that they should be guarded everywhere where they turn up, including the border of Russia and Ukraine. I gave it a thought and I said, yes, we would agree to this. And right away, we corrected our resolution.
But it transpires that it is insufficient, and now it boils down to putting this territory under international control. We're not against, but for this the Kiev authorities should negotiate it with the Donbass authorities, and such conflicts worldwide have never been resolved via intermediaries. It should involve direct talks between the warring parties, and the Kiev authorities today dodge these contacts with respect to swaps of prisoners. I agree that people suffer being innocent. You think it is the initiative of Donbass? Oh no. Just yesterday there was another round of shelling by the Ukraine's armed forces, or probably by nationalist battalions. It is not fully clear. As far as I know, the regular troops and the nationalist battalions are not always on good terms getting along with each other, which is, I believe, correct, because the true military people, the servicemen, aim at defending their country from the external aggression, not from the domestic strife, even be it so dramatic and tense as we see in Donbass. With respect to swaps and exchanges, as per the instruction of Mr. Poroshenko, Mr. Medvedchuk is in charge, and the Patriarchate invited him to the New Jerusalem monastery, where, as we have long not had the exchanges and the swaps, he called on us to influence the heads of Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. And for the first time ever, I had a conversation with these heads. They agreed, and afterwards Medvedchuk, upon coordination with the Ukrainian party, submitted a list of 67 people on one side and around 300 people taken held in captivity on the other hand. And it was the Ukrainian list who was agreed upon, it was accepted. I'm not distorting things, just beware. And all of a sudden, afterwards it turned to be a wrong list, and now it is at a halt once again. So let's make this step forward, and probably later we'll have some more developments. Like in the view of the New Year and the Christmas, we should make this good step to accommodate each other. As regards Saakashvili, I believe what he has been doing is spitting in the face of the Georgian people as well as the Ukrainian people. How are you able to put up with this? This person used to be president of an independent Georgian state, and now he's horsing around squares and shouting he's Ukrainian. But don't you have real Ukrainians in Ukraine? Why have you been tolerating on that? So meager a sight, and, you know, I'm being heartbroken over these things. Now, with respect to whether we're close or have any affinity with each other or we're far away, you know, positions differ, and the Slavic world developed on a complex basis, and very many Slavic tribes merged to form the Kiev Russia, with the Kiev being its capital, ancient capital. And I have a right to say that we have the same roots and we are one big nation at the background, at the core, which is clear. But another thing is clear: in the course of history, in the course of Ukraine being close to the western borders of Russia, developing on its own track, they have their own wonderful identity in language and culture and in other things, and these things are beloved in Russia. We believe it's part of our culture. In the 19th century, some people emerged saying that Ukraine should become independent and be autonomous and self-ruling. Did they have a right to say so? Probably. In an empire with violent Russification of a kind. For Ukraine it didn't matter much because it is an Orthodox country, and in passports they didn't have the nationality or ethnicity line, just the faith. And the Ukrainians and the Russians had no differences whatsoever as per documents. And the Ukraine became part of Russia in 1645. 3 regions: Kiev, Chernigov and Zhytomyr. These 3 regions formed the Ukraine back then, and they merged with the Russian Empire. And some additional territory was added as a result of historical development like Russian-Turkish wars and other developments. But in 1922 to 24, the Bolsheviks decided that all those territories adjacent to the historical part of Ukraine should enter the Republic, the Soviet Republic of Ukraine, like the Black Sea region, western regions of that area were merged with the Ukrainian Republic. And in 1954, in violation of the Soviet Union legislation, the Crimean Peninsula was transferred to Ukraine by a sole decision of the panel of the Supreme Soviet, which was the Soviet Parliament. And I will not tell you what happened afterwards. was the manifestation of people's will, and some people believe that Ukraine should keep developing as an independent state. Okay, one shouldn't struggle against this opinion. It would be counterproductive, let it be so. But all the world goes along a different track. People from different ethnicities and creeds bundled together in Europe, in Asia, in America, in North America, everywhere, worldwide. As I once said, we've been split apart, and then we've been indisposed against each other, and now we are to arrive at what would be beneficial for both countries and what would be counterproductive. In continuation, as a follow-up on the intergovernmental things, Mir TV and radio company. Thank you, Mr. Peskov, along the Linet Mir company. In several days, the Eurasian Economic Union will celebrate its 3 years birthday. Our integration started at a difficult period of time for Russia. In 2014, the oil price plummeted and the West imposed sanctions, and many people in the EU, many people in the Eurasian Union, believe that the sanctions are to blame, the sanctions against Russia are to blame for the fact that we haven't been able to come up with real cogent advantages of merging capital and labor markets. What do you think about this opinion of some people? And do we have to achieve something else, I mean the Eurasian Economic Union? And what if the United States imposes new sanctions against Russia? How will it impact the Eurasian Economic Union? Well, the Eurasian Economic Union is our huge common achievement. It is an advance. Criticism is always there, including with respect to the advancement of the Eurasian Economic Union, but the numbers are self-evident. We've made the correct decisions and we're moving in the right direction, and the inter-union trade and export flows are on the rise, which is evident from the statistics. We saw it go up by 29%, if I'm not mistaken. Even with those countries that joined just recently, they also have the positive results. Our GDP increased by 1.6 in this country, in the Russian Federation, but the aggregate GDP of the Eurasian Union countries increased by 1.8%, which is a very good indicator. We see changes for the better in terms of our trade structure. Like in Belarus, 1/3 of export supplies inside the Eurasian Economic Union is machines and equipment. Agricultural produce accounts for another 1/3. Like Belarus received a right from us, was granted a right to receive 24 million tons of oil free of charge and export all that abroad. And the benefit they see is that the income is recognized in their budget. And we have all grounds to say that we are moving in the right direction. There are some pending issues, though. What are they? Multiple exemptions and exclusions from the overall common decisions with respect to energy and electric power. But we have a plan of action to fully liberalize all these sectors. We will keep moving along this track. And there are some issues as regards customs regulation. This is also a very vital topic. What are we to do? We are to introduce on a mandatory basis, which was agreed by us among the union members, we will introduce electronic declaration procedure for the goods that are moved across the territory of the Union. We'll keep track of these movements. And joint stations, custom stations, I don't think there is anything bad about this. Like our customs checkpoints should welcome custom officers from Belarus and Kazakhstan, and theirs should welcome our officers, which is not a breach of sovereignty principle. It makes the operation of customs more transparent. And definitely we should introduce new technology of goods flow and transfer cross borders. I saw it as on here. Public utilities is the slogan, is the placard. Let's go down to earth a bit. Welcome. Thank you for giving me the floor, Alexei Kochetkov, TKR TV channel Ryazan. Good afternoon, Mr. President. I'd like to utter a short request, just 2 sentences in our region now. The landscaping program is gathering pace and people choose on their own what is to appear where. It's an urban development program, comfortable environment and other things. And please don't stop funding, although there are no signs of this. People need these programs badly. My question about public utilities. Of late, people have been filing complaints that the tariffs are on the rise and the quality of the services rendered to them is quite poor. So the question is, what should be done today in this sphere to avoid such complaints in future? And I see another sign saying public utilities. Will you pass the mic over there? Yeah, I'll turn to you in a second. Vladislav Sakharchuk, Kaluga 24 website journalist. Despite all the positive developments in public utilities and housing, there is a huge black hole, which are management companies that haven't been acting in good faith. They collect money from people, local communities, but they don't pay to service providers, and they go belly up and disappear with all that money. Even in Kaluga region, we try to monitor all these things, but sometimes the situation becomes quite dramatic. And locally and regionally, we cannot cope with this issue. We need the federal response. Thank you so much. I know that the decision will be made to introduce direct settlements between the local communities and the service providers and public utilities. It's a first step only in a row. It is a criminalized sphere, and it should be brought back to order. Thank you. With public utilities, another question right here. Floor to you.
Yes, please, go ahead. Please take the mic and introduce yourself. Viktor Smirnov, 47 News.ru from the Leningrad region. And November, December, officers and contract members of the armed forces got huge, exorbitant utilities bills. 1 month, one family was required to pay up to 50,000 rubles. This was because the managing company changed, and yet the towns are dilapidated. There is, well, this is something they don't show to you, but we've got everything, all the documents and the photos. Can we somehow stop this bleeding of the armed forces, the change of managing companies that take money from the population? I'm very concerned with those towns where officers and members of the armed forces live. I think this is a very acute issue. If the armed forces go, this doesn't mean that people have to be abandoned to their own devices. The municipal authorities have to be very careful, and the transfer of responsibility from one managing company to the other has to be managed smoothly. And a colleague from here said that despite the positive trends that we can witness in the utilities sphere, there are still many issues persisting. And the second person, or even the third, also mentioned the problems with utilities. What do these problems consist in. First, about my own attitude. I do not think that this situation is developing in the positive veins. The number of problems is far superior to that of solutions. Yes, some decisions have been made over the recent years. Something has changed for the better, but this is by far not sufficient. I believe that the regional authorities and the federal authorities, in particular the relevant ministries such as the construction ministry, with the whole department dedicated to utilities, are underperforming, and that is quite clear. What's the crux of the matter? The matter is that the so-called managing companies collect money for utility bills as well as for housing bills. What's the difference? The utilities are the payments that are to be transferred to supplying organizations, the gas supply, water supply, electricity supply organizations, maybe sewage and drainage systems, whereas the housing payment is for everything that is happening within one particular building, one particular house. So the managing company takes money for everything, and then it pays some money to the resource supply organizations, and it turns out that they do not always send this money to those to whom the money is due and on time, and not everyone, or even not enough supervision is there. And we've got to cut these managing companies from this endless supply of money, and right now this draft law is being considered. One reading has already been passed, and it has to be adopted in the nearest future. Very often they charge bills, unjustifiably so. The clients have to contest that in court. And in accordance with the new decisions to be adopted, the managing companies are not simply going to have to recalculate. They will also have to pay 50% extra if they miscalculate the bill, and these decisions have to be finalized and implemented. Now, as for the tariff regulation, as mentioned, there are two types of payments, the housing payments and the utilities. As for the utilities, in this particular context, there exists federal regulation. Over the last couple of years, the threshold, or rather the ceiling for the tariff growth is 4%. But unfortunately, the ceiling is not observed. And on average, the utilities bills growth is not 4%. According to the latest data, as saw, it's 8.8%, which is absolutely unacceptable. We've got the ceiling of 4% to be observed. Now, as for the housing, something the managing companies and the regions are responsible for, there is no ceiling, there is no regulation whatsoever. So, in this particular field, the housing tariffs are exorbitant. The growth rate is 23% or even more than that. And in certain months, it's more than 30%. And it's no good. What has to be done? Restrictions have to be imposed, just as the case with utilities. A ceiling has to be introduced, and, of course, immediately. But the most important thing is to ensure the development of the utilities system, the on-time construction of relevant facilities, as well as the refurbishment of the existing ones. Let's go on. I can see our colleagues from China. Russia, China, the main thing. Hello, Mr. President Sun Jan. I'm from the International Chinese Radio, the mobile app, Russia, China, the main things, the headlines. In March 2018, Russia is going to hold presidential elections. How do you think their outcome is going to impact the Russian-Chinese relations, or do you think the strategic partnership that we have is more important than the short-term political situation in our countries? Yes, Xinhua, please. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I am a correspondent from the Xinhua news agency. My name is Luan Han. As we know, Russia and China have announced the linkage between two strategies, the One Belt, One Road and the Eurasian Economic Union. Could you comment on the achievements on this particular avenue over the last year, what is your assessment of the achievements as well as the prospects for the development of Russia-China relations? Secondly, the Communist Party of China has announced the task of building new international relations as well as the building of a community of one future based on mutual respect and benefit. What's your assessment of that? Is Russia willing to cooperate with China to pursue this goal? Well, first and foremost, on the decisions adopted at the last Communist Party Convention of China, I believe they're very good, very positive, because these decisions set forth an agenda for the development of China itself, as well as for building international relations, and it coincides or is very similar to what we propose in terms of Russia's development and international relations in terms of Russia's place in this world. As for the first component, I refer in particular to the economy. The economy of China is developing at a high rate to boot, thanks to the policy that was pursued in the previous generation by President Xi Jinping and his predecessor. What the charter of the Communist Party stipulates, as well as the amendments introduced therein, say that China wants to be stable and seeks development, which is to serve as a foundation for bettering the life of their citizens. And for us, it is very important because China is our largest trading partner, and it is also a strategic partner of ours in the broadest sense of the word. Indeed, we've got the biggest trade in country terms with China, around 63 billion. It decreased a little bit due to the world economic crisis, but we are catching up to the previous level, and I'm confident that very soon we'll go even ahead and have even more. As for the new Silk Road, on multiple occasions I said that it can no doubt be linked and combined with the development of the Eurasian Economic Union, as well as the broad partnership we propose in Asia. Even now, we can talk about our accomplishments in this regard. I answered your colleague's question, she sits to the left, about the development of the Arctic. China is showing a great interest in the Northern Sea Route, and that is only natural. If we can make it navigable throughout the whole year, and I do hope that this is something we're going to achieve quite soon, then the transportation of goods from Asia to Europe and vice versa is going to be far more economically efficient than through the existing routes as of now. That's the first thing. And secondly, we are going to do everything in our power for China to be able to benefit from that. Russia is interested in that, just as China is. China is right now part of our largest projects in the Arctic. We will launch the Yamal LNG plant to produce 5.5 million tons of liquefied natural gas. 2 more units are going to be commissioned very soon. It's going to be 16.5 million tons. And China is one of the largest investors in this LNG plant in the Yamal Peninsula, because there is economic interest there, and we're going to facilitate that in other projects too, where we know full well about the pipelines and gas pipelines. We're going to pursue them. We've got a wonderful project and high-speed roads, which is the Silk Road is about, and we support that, the high-speed from railways from China to Europe through Russia. That is a wonderful project. We're going to increase manyfold the speed of transportation of goods and people. We've got high technology projects in outer space exploration and aviation. On the whole, we are confident that we are moving in the right direction, and we are fully determined to pursue it further. As for the elections in Russia, I am fully confident that the development of our relations with China is sort of a national consensus in Russia. So regardless of the outcome of the presidential campaign, both Russia and China are going to continue to be strategic partners in the long prospect. Let's turn here. NTV, Kondratyev, one of our veterans, so to speak. Mr. President, our society is paying a great deal of attention to your next presidential term should you emerge victorious at the election. How different is this term going to be, and what team are you going to choose to manage the country in those 6 years? And how do you see the new government, whether the current government is going to survive until the election? And what strategy for social and economic development, which has been developed for many experts, is going to be chosen by you? As for the current government, on the whole, I believe it is doing a satisfactory job despite the well-known problems in terms of utilities, for instance. I just mentioned it, and it has to be addressed. There are many other outstanding issues that require particular attention, but on the whole, the government is doing quite well, quite steadily, and its performance is satisfactory, which is incidentally attested to by the fact that the economy has been growing at an increased pace, and we have re-established macroeconomic development, which is to serve as the basis for our subsequent economic development. But for that, we wouldn't have foreign direct investment. All of what we're witnessing is the fruit of growing trust and the policy the Russian government is pursuing. As for the future configuration of the government, please don't take offense, but it is premature to tell. Wait, this is something to be talked about after the elections. Certainly, I've got some preliminary ideas. Yes, thank you. Just a second, please. A moment. You've got neighbors of Ukraine, Poland, raising their placard.
Last year, I was asking you about the wreckage of the presidential plane, and I believe that nothing has changed. But I wanted to yet again ask when we can expect the return of the wreckage of this plane. And the second question is, in Poland, we are going to publish a new report on this incident. There is a commission with the Ministry of Defense in the new government, with the new authorities. They're reviewing this case again, and there were reports of explosions on board of the plane. And the Minister of Defense is saying that he has proof of that, and there is a commission, investigating commission working. And it is being said that your people have provoked this catastrophe and have conducted this, actually. Well, listen, we're tired of such bluffing. We're simply tired of this. This is just gibberish. They're saying pure gibberish. I'd like to remind you that I was the Prime Minister of the Russian Federation at that moment. So some kind of actions by special services and law enforcement, I was not immediately involved in that. If there were explosions on board, where did the plane take off? In Moscow or in Warsaw? So they were planted then there. So were there some Russian agents planting the bombs there? You should look in your own country then. But there were no explosions, as the experts from Polish side and from Russian side were saying. They have studied it very carefully, what was happening when someone went into the cockpit and said that the pilot is saying that I cannot land. Well, and the person is saying I cannot report that to him. So land, and that they did it. We're sympathizing with you. That was a sad story. We're sympathizing with you, and instead people are just spiraling. Making this investigation spiral out of control. You should not invent anything. If there is a problem, if there is a tragedy, you should treat it as a tragedy. You should not be making any political inventions here. Why? Why are you doing this? Do you want to complicate Russian and Polish relations any further? To what end? To increase domestic ratings? Or for what? I believe that Russian and Polish relations are much more important than the current political strives in Poland between different political forces that are using the anti-Russian factor in their strives. Turn the page, grow up. You have to get more mature, in line with the demands of today and in line with the interests of the Polish nation and the Polish country. By being hung up on these problems, you're incurring a lot of losses. Think about the losses because of the sanctions that Poland has joined. Think about the lost jobs. Think about the enterprises that did not take place. We do not want anything from Poland. We want to develop our relations with Poland, and I hope that this approach will take the upper hand. Mr. President would not give the floor to Interfax yet. I see. Please, give the floor. The microphone here, please, in the center of the central sector. Good afternoon, Mr. President. Ksenia Golovanova, Interfax. I wanted to ask you about Syria. Mr. Peskov, I try to be brief. Considering the amount of context that you had on Syrian settlement in the recent time, what do you think? What are the main stumbling blocks? What are the main hindrances to the normalization process in the country? Who should bear the burden of rebuilding infrastructure? Who can or should take this burden? As for our bases, considering what you said, that ISIS has been defeated in Syria, what do you think is the role of these bases? Are you concerned that our Western partners can treat their presence only as an instrument of supporting Assad? And the last thing, when you went to Syria, that looked pretty cool. Could you tell me when you decided to do that? Did our airspace forces take part in ensuring the safety of your trip? Maybe Syrian forces also helped you. And when will you pull out the contingent out of Syria? If you, Mr. President, there's also a Syrian flag, and it's written "Our Victory" there. Thank you. Magomed Magomedov, Republican Information Agency of Dagestan. In 1999, you visited Dagestan when you won against the incursion of international terrorists in the Republic. Today, basically the same thing happened in Syria. But the terrorism is not yet defeated, I believe. Right now, you as a character are seen as a leader of a state that is fighting terrorism. Unfortunately, the experience of the Americans, what we see, brings no result. What are the perspectives? What's the outlook? Can we destroy the puppet masters of these terrorists in ISIL? Hold on a second. There is also another question. Hold on. I will cry. Stop it. Mr. President, it's good to be Sergei Brylev or Andrei Kolesnikov. It's much easier to attract your attention. I represent the school teachers newspaper, but I deal with international journalism and education. I went to Khmeimim in February. You said Kolesnikov, but it's not. It's hard to be. My name is Aslan Kasanov. Sorry I didn't introduce myself. In this case, otherwise. So the first Russian who came on foot to Khmeimim airbase. From where? I was taken off the bus. I was trying to travel from Lataki to Tartus and Koms. I was making a circle. Where are you from? From Dagestan? Well, I'm from Chechnya, but that's a different thing. Only Chechen people can travel around there by foot. In Koms, I went to the refugee camp. There are a lot of orphans. I just traveled to Istanbul. There are Syrian children running around. They are barefooted and they're begging for money. In these refugee camps, Syrian children still remain. There are no educational programs. as I saw it myself, the humanitarian aid is being provided, but what will happen with these children in 10 or 15 years? No one knows. Maybe after you have declared the defeat of terrorism in Syria, maybe it's necessary to think about how to create the humanitarian intervention, the educational intervention, because I'll remind you, in Damascus, there used to be a Russian cultural center in place. It was closed down. I graduated from Institute of North Africa and Asia, just like your press secretary. Maybe you should give instruction to such a person like me, for example, to start the educational center. I could do that. I'll be happy. I think there is already a person from Chechnya who is organizing this work. I think his name is Kadyrov. But he's dealing with bringing out children from there. I think this is very right, and the right thing to do. But you're completely right. Jokes aside now, please sit down. You're completely right. This is a problem. And Turkey is suffering from this issue the most because the largest refugee camps are there in Turkey, but also in Jordan, in other countries as well. We also know about the problem with migrants that Europe has come across. So naturally, we need to solve this issue. And independently, Syria will hardly be able to do that. I will not be afraid of being making a rubber statement here, but I would say that all people of goodwill will help them. You were completely correct when you said that if Syrian children will have no education, that they will not be brought up in human conditions, that means that they'll be lost, because terrorism has to do with low education level and low income. This is the main source of terrorism right now. And indeed, this issue has to be solved. We need to do that. But Syria alone cannot do that. But Russia alone also cannot deal with that. We're prepared to take part in the process, but only as one of the components of overall international efforts. And for your questions and for your initiative, I would like to thank you. So I cannot rule out that you can work there in the future, maybe. Right now, we have our military police from Northern Caucasus working there. Why? I think I spoke about it already. That was my initiative, to send as police force the people from Northern Caucasus, because mainly they're Sunnis, and the locals, the Sunnis, they trust them, and the authorities trust them as well, because they're Russian military, and the local residents also believe them because they're Sunnis. I think it was a good thing. They're very disciplined, they're very courageous. These people, police, they knew what kind of burden of responsibility they had, and they were very noble in their actions when they represented the interests of Russia. Please let me finish. But this part is extremely important, and I think that participation of our specialists, just like you, will be in high demand. Now, as for my trip, well, the need for such travels, that was clear for me for a long time. And the question was whether such conditions will be created. The question was when we're going to eliminate these organized terrorist groups and what kind of situation on the ground will be in place. Now, we had the needed conditions. We're mainly done with these organized terrorist groups. Now, as for ensuring security, security was ensured by our military on the ground as well, because, well, the specialists know this. The most dangerous part of such trips is landing and takeoff of the plane, which could be the target of a ground anti-aircraft system. I saw pilots who were doing that, and they went lower than our aircraft. And the turbines, the nozzles of our of military aircraft much higher temperature than the civilian aircraft, so they were basically covering our aircraft. Later they parted. What was the main hindrance? I would like to thank right now, because they can. I don't think there was such a need for it, but still, that was the way that they acted. What is the main hindrance to final solution in Syria and in fighting terrorism on the whole? Fighting terrorism is increasing the well-being and the educational level and correcting historical injustice in this region, historical injustice in the region and in the world on the whole. In Syria, as well as in other places, it's extremely important for all players, for all major players, to have no temptation to use different terrorist and quasi-terrorist and radical groups to achieve their goals for this day. Al-Qaeda was created to fight the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and in the end they made a strike on New York on 9/11, and our pilots see right now that, for example, terrorist fighters are leaving into Iraq, and we're reporting to Iraq that fighters are leaving and going to Iraq, and there is no response to that. They're leaving and so on. That's it. Because they think maybe that they can be used in fighting in the future. That's the easiest way, but it's the most dangerous one, including for those who does this. Alexander Gamov, I cannot help but give him the floor. This is Komsomolskaya Pravda newspaper. This is a website, radio, and newspaper. Alexander Gamov, Komsomolskaya Pravda. The main political question for today, I believe, is the health of the nation. I think you can agree with me here. We all know, and you know, that President and the government are paying a lot of attention to that. And you can hardly argue that over the past 10, 15 years, we have stepped in major strides, and Russia has medical centers. We opened such centers, and I was present at their openings, and we couldn't dream about them even before. You know that in such green folders, simultaneously you have, apart from the progress, you also had the streamlining of some healthcare symptoms, and it seems that it's a nightmare because you started to make larger medical centers, and all across Russia you're closing down on mid-range medical health care. I believe in places where you have roads or sanitary aviation, it is possible to transport the patient. But when there is no aviation, there are no roads, this is a nightmare. I'm from the province, actually. And even in Moscow, after this streamlining, it's hard to get to a certain specialist, for example. Now it's so complicated. Please be more brief. Today, on the website of Komsomolskaya Pravda, as I have already promoted today, Ludmila Yanina and her colleagues in Grief, in Orenburg, there were 2 dialysis centers as far as I know, but it's all very hard, and people have to brave the weather, and it all has to do with money, with economic basis.
For example, my appeal goes as follows. Well, our appeal is to put your question. So don't you think that it was too much and that this background is too horrible? And to follow up, since I have the mic, and yes, and nobody else is going to get it. You've visited Komsomolskaya Pravda 3 times, and I do hope that you'll visit us again. Probably Mr. Peskov will assist us in it. Thank you for your invitation. Please give me an opportunity to answer, because if you all set your questions and I cannot answer our meeting goes in vain. So, as regards the healthcare, as I indicated at the beginning of our meeting, this is our priority development track for the future. In addition to what? Well, okay, go ahead. Good afternoon, Mr. President. I'm sorry for my intervention. Denis Wolf, Gubernia TV channel, Voronezh and Voronezh region. So we watch news coverage. Here is a famous person who leaves the country in order to get medical treatment. In particular, I'm talking about oncological diseases. And we have a question. Can't we treat oncology here in Russia? Well, we can. We have institutions, we have hospitals, we have everything. Probably we lack equipment. And this is it. In Voronezh, there is an issue of building medical centers specializing in oncology, because this is a very complicated technology which comes from abroad. This is not produced in Russia. Is it possible, in the framework of some federal program, for example, healthcare federal program, is there an opportunity to provide co-financing of constructing oncological medical centers? I think that this is a big problem for the whole of Russia. Okay, then I'm going to answer the two questions. First of all, the programs for developing healthcare. You've been right in mentioning that it has been done a lot in order to make the high-tech medical assistance more available. We have created perinatal centers, and we've done a lot. We'll try to finalize this program, and we'll do our best in order to continue it, in order to decrease the maternity and children death rate. We have nearly same indicators in a decrease in death rate caused by some external factors, including some car crashes and disasters, and we decrease the death rate, the deaths brought about by TB and other diseases, and we do move forward in the area of battling with oncology, but the problem still exists, and we'll do a lot in order to cope with it. Now, about the shrinking network. I think that I agree with you, and I think that in many cases it is not necessary and it is unacceptable. Taking into account that the beds in our hospitals are taken not to treat those who are ill, but just to sanitate and to improve the overall health status. Whereas the situation is that the beds are getting more scarce, and the people that pretend to have this bed are increasing. What should be done about it? We should increase the overall financing, and it will be done the next year. This year we have 3.8% from our GDP. Next year it is going to be, well, this data was provided by the Ministry of Finance. It may be slightly different from the data provided by other ministries. And for the next year, we plan with 4.1% for overall medical expenses. What we should pay special attention to is to preserve, where possible, and create new forms of medical service in smaller settlements that can from 100 to 2,000 dwellers. That's for one thing. For another thing, for settlements that have less than 100 dwellers, we need to use the mobile medical stations. And as you also have mentioned, the additional assistance to people suffering from heart diseases, and to provide more medical assistance to them Our life expectancy has increased from 65 to nearly 73 years, and the number of people who suffer under heart diseases, their number is increasing, so the money that is allocated for that purpose is not enough. I have already tasked the government to increase the amount of funding allocated for painkillers and for other medicines, including specialized equipment for those who need to use it at home. Echo Moskvy, the echo of Moscow, please. I see the lady who is also lined with us, so. About the Omul. I'm here. Tatiana Filgengauer, Echo Moskvy radio station, where are you? I'm here. Please be healthy. I hope that everything is okay with you. I have a question about the rule of law in the Russian Federation. We see two different legal realities. In one reality, there is a real repressive machine that raises criminal prosecution for some reposts in social networks, which imprisons such people as Mr. Navalny, Srebrenikov, and Malabrodsky. At the same time, we see another legal reality in which Boris Nemtsov is killed, Ruslan Geremeyev is not questioned. Mr. Sechin, the head of Rosneft, does not turn up in court to be present at the hearing of Mr. Ulukayev's case, thus ignoring all the summons. I believe that any other citizens would be brought to court, whereas this man thinks that it's possible just to ignore the summons. So what sort of rule of law can we put on our agenda if there are two absolutely different legal realities in the Russian Federation? Well, I agree that there are numerous problems, but I do not agree that we have two different realities. As for Mr. Sechin and his failure to turn up in court, if there is some infringement of the law should react correspondingly. But as far as I think, because I was interested in this question, the law has not been infringed in this case. And the investigation materials display the data received from Mr. Sechin. So he could have failed to turn up in court, and the investigation materials will have his testimony that had been collected before. As for the arguments that can arise in such situations, they can only be settled in court. That is why there is a need to further strengthen the judicial system. I beg your pardon? It's quite difficult. Let it be Murmansk. So please wait for the mic and introduce yourself. By all means. Good afternoon, Mr. President. Potrебитель. My name is Mikhail Zub. I have a question about the fishing industry. So we thank you for your statement that fish is our national richness and that it should be supported. And we also support what has been said by you about the import of 78%. But we have to say that there are some disbalances in the development of logistics and infrastructure. We have a question. There is a federal law number 349 that 70% cuts down your ideology. Secondly, there is an order 632, 633. And what is the cut down? you tried to proceed from fish catching to processing to the capitalization and marketing. So you started from the processing. It was put vice versa, but this is not correct. In the Decree 632, the decision was made that the investment facility, for example, a factory needs 20,000 tons of raw material. But in the next decree, it is said that 70% of a quota is required for the factory to function. The quota is 9,000 tons. 5,000 tons out of them is required in order for factory to function. So we built a factory that for the 4,000 tons of processing practically destroys the infrastructure. The conditions were even worse for processors because there was a contradiction with Decree 639. Because there was a need for financial provision for the construction of the factory and for the processing. So I have a question. As of today, allegedly, you are the judge. So we launched the 2 blocks, one for fish catching, the second for processing. And the factories who managed to provide all the necessary documents to the relevant agency, to Rosrybolovstvo, please give them an opportunity to participate in the tender for quota and to build such factory. And what is most important, you have brought some fish with you. And what is most important, the question of China about the Northern Sea route, about the logistics. So here is 400 paper sheets of this law. You can read it or you can put it paper waste. I have deceived you. I am not a journalist. I am the head of director board of the Murmansk fishing factory. Well, this is bad because you were accredited as a journalist. This is bad, but we strive to survive, and we know how to survive. We know how to catch the Russian Far Eastern fish sorts. And to make it and to market it at 50 rubles, not at 300 rubles. We know how to market our fish at 50 rubles. Because fish is supposed to be cheaper than chicken, while what we have is that it's much more expensive. And I acknowledge that I'm here illegally because it's easier to be journalists. Well, thank you. Thank you for your, revelation. Look, if we go deep into detail now, nobody's going to understand us. Recently, I talked with Mr. Shestakov to discuss all those issues, and on the whole, I share your concerns. If we fail to create the conditions for fish processing, then all the fish we have will be exported, it will be transported to third countries, it will be processed there, they will add value to it, and our fish price will remain as high as it is today.
Well, to provide for the necessary logistic mechanisms and redistribute the quotas. The 20% that you've mentioned, I also have similar set of questions building on that. But the only thing in response is, what I heard is that the sharp movement up or down the rate scale may subvert all the production industry in the fishery, and it cannot be overhauled overnight, radically. In this case, well, let's not debate on that because it's not an industrial meeting. But I will invite you to one of the relevant meetings so that we can hear the voice of the producers and processing industry. By and large, the issue is clear. We've been tackling that, and we will keep doing so. And my sympathy tilts to you and I believe that I will not forestall developments, but I believe that to a large extent you are right, and we should consider the concerns that you've voiced, and we will definitely make use of the papers while preparing for the meeting. Over there, I can see Ksenia. Against all, Madam Sobchak. Yeah, coming. Others are coming. Miss, you're against all of those attending today's press conference? No. I'm for Russians, and I'm for lack of alternation in power. I have a question about the competition at the forthcoming elections. I'm going to stand for... Are you as a journalist, or you deceived everybody else as the previous interview? No, I'm in my capacity of a journalist from the Dozhd TV channel. It's the only chance, unfortunately, to ask you a question. You don't participate in debates, unfortunately. So my question is about competing and competition at elections. Your press secretary, Mr. Peskov, has said that our opposition is immature, and you have mentioned today that it's not your goal to breed and bring up the opposition. But I believe we have these people in place. They're well bred up and quite mature. But today, the opposition candidates either are barred from the elections and banned, or problems are created for them. For example, Mr. Navalny has been campaigning for a year as a presidential candidate, and fictitious allegations have been set forth against him, which was proved by the European Court decision, and the Russian Federation recognizes that decision. Unfortunately, he is banned from the election campaign, and there is a special opinion of the Constitutional Court, a special ruling. Same refers to my activities after I made the announcement to stand for presidency. It is very important to rent premises across the country. People would not cooperate with me on commercial terms only, and I cannot supply handouts, campaign handouts. And in this country, being an opposition politician means that you will be either jailed or killed or anything else of the kind. Why is this the case? Do the authorities, does the power holders, are the power holders afraid of competition, fair competition? With respect to competition and, the effective opposition, presence or absence, I provided a detailed answer, and it's not about the fact that someone is immature for something, but the point is that the opposition characters are to come up with a clear, transparent program, an agenda of positive action that would chime well with people. You are against all. Is it a positive, constructive agenda? What do you propose to resolve all those issues we've been discussing today? As regards the characters you mentioned, you know what the question was about Ukraine? It was asked today, do you want dozens of such Saakashvilis running across squares in our cities and towns? The people you called are similar to Saakashvili, akin to him. You want them to destabilize the situation in our country. You want us to have one coup after another. You want us to have coup attempts similar to the Maidan in Kiev. Do you want to have these things back? We passed it all before. We saw it before. The vast majority of Russian citizens wouldn't like that to happen. They would not accept that. They would preclude that. Wouldn't allow that. And there definitely should be competition at the elections. It will be there. But it's a matter of radicalism, I believe. Look what happened to Occupy Wall Street movement in the United States. Where is that movement, I wonder? Like in the US? Where are they? Such Saakashvilis and the kin. They're gone. Is it a democracy or not? What is a democracy? What is democracy by and large? It's a matter for in-depth going discussions. But rest assured, we're not afraid of anyone. The power holders are not afraid, but it should not look like a man with a beard that tries to lazily remove cabbage from his beard, looking at the process of the country turning into a muddy puddle and the oligarchs fishing, trying to catch the golden fish. Don't we don't want this to be Ukraine 2.0. We will not accept that. Mr. President, you've been answering the questions for 3 hours already. Baikal, I want Baikal. Baikal. Afternoon, my name is Ilya Koshinov, Buryatia State TV and Radio Company. I wanted to raise an issue at the federal level. Since the 1st of October, the catch of Baikal local fish ban was imposed. And like in the north of Siberia and other regions, adjacent regions, people lived off that, and the unemployment benefit is the only resort for them. So it's about the prohibition on the catch of omul. I believe you are right, and it's inadmissible. Definitely we should defend our environment, because like the ban on the black caviar is not fully adhered to, because you can see sales everywhere. With respect to omul fish catch, the moratorium definitely should take into account those people living off that. And the second part is on Baikal. Afternoon, Mr. President. Yulia Permykov, representing TV.com, Buryat TV company, Ulan-Ude. 2 questions on Baikal. The borders, the frontiers of the protective zones have been expanded to 1 kilometer or 800 meters, and people cannot privatize their homes, and they should move across the concrete roads, asphalt ones. And an activist visited Donskoy for a talk, and it's about 130,000 people, 4 districts there. Can it be tackled somehow? Can we get to grips with that? And the second is about the city of Ulan-Ude, which is a tourist destination in Buryatia. We've been waiting for 10 years for the 3rd bridge across the Our River to be built, to the tune of 4.5 billion rubles. Now we have a new governor, Alexei Itsedinov, who has been doing a lot to find and raise these funds, but definitely we receive dotations, and we don't have this money in our regional or municipal budgets. Will the federal government be able to fund the construction of the bridge, and what will be the timeline? Such infrastructure installations are always built with the federal budget help. I will talk to the transport minister, on the governor. Definitely we should, on a timely basis, provide bids and make sure they're included into the transport infrastructure plan, including the bridges construction. As regards the water restrictive area expansion, I want to tell you that we should maintain the environment and uphold the conservation, but that should be based on the common sense and without breaching the rights of people living there. We'll come back to that. Mr. President, you know, I received a text message saying that I'm treating Russia today like the Department of State. I'm not. You are employed by the Department of State. You work for them, or what? It's unacceptable. We'll punish you. Russia Today, please. Where are you? I can't see you. Thank you, Mr. Press Secretary. My name is Ilya Petrenko, and as the Press Secretary said, I represent Russia Today TV channel. Mr. President, initially I wanted to ask you a question about your personal contacts with Donald Trump, but you mentioned that 2 times. Just a clarification. If in the English language we should have the second person and the third person of treating people, would you opt for the more informal option with him or not? And the pressure exerted upon Russia today and Sputnik News in the United States continues. We've been responding, but what is the limit of our response, which is number 1? And number 2, if that impacts the freedom of word in this country, and just in a nutshell, another issue today in the region of Kurgan, there was a trial for the illegal trafficking of special gear. Well, a farmer attached a GPS tracker to his cow, and the investigation was suspended, and his name is Eugene, and he's watching the press conference. Well, it has been returned to the Prosecutor General's office for additional consideration, but last year more than 200 people were convicted upon this article. GPS, is it illegal? No, he ordered a GPS tracker from China and attached it on his cow. But is it prohibited? Does one have to pay? There is an article that spells out that a person may be brought to account, criminal account. I didn't know that. I will look into that and study the article of the criminal code and these specific people. I know that the GPS trackers and GLONASS trackers are sometimes attached to cats. Why not do that with a cow? Or probably he should pay some fee, or what was it? Some authorized, unauthorized, and improvised device. I'll make sure to. Well, with respect to Mr. Trump, we treat each other by name. I'm not sure. Well, if there would be this informal second person, we probably would stick to that. But despite the fact that we met in person only 2 times, and we talked over the phone several times, but I believe still that would be more preferable to establish a working contact as per our mandate from our voters that we received as presidents. I hope that in future he will have more opportunities to establish better contacts with Russia, and he would go along the track of his electoral pledges and intentions. Yeah. What is that about? Like a second, just a second. Thank you so much. Rodavi TV channel, Iraqi Kurdistan. Just a short question with respect to your attitude towards the Iraqi Kurdistan, Iraq's Kurdistan currently, and whether the Russian Federation is committed to maintain relationship with Iraqi Kurdistan. Thank you.
Just look at what happened. A referendum on independence was held. Subsequently, the head of Kurdistan announced that the implementation of that decision taken at the referendum had to be postponed. It is not our decision, it's your decision. Then he resigned, and the decision to postpone the implementation is still in force. What should be our attitude? Our attitude is that everything should go on without any incidents under the current legislation, with due respect for the territorial integrity of Iraq. The leadership of Kurdistan themselves acted precisely in this manner. And how else? Our companies like Rosneft are working in Iraq, and in particular in the Iraqi Kurdistan. This cooperation is going to benefit Iraq, Kurdistan, as well as the Russian economy. And as for Kurdistan and the Kurds, traditionally we have had very good, friendly relations full of trust. I do realize how complicated this issue is, how multifaceted it is, but given all these specifics, we assume that nothing prevents us from developing our relations with the Kurds. Afghanistan, yes. First oil and then Afghanistan, right away. Just a moment. Yes, they're going to hold the mic for you, just speak up. My name is Natalia Menshikova from Nizhnevartovsk TV. Yugra, the capital of Sametlor, the oil region. I'm going to tweak my question a little bit. We need to bring our nation together. We need an idea for that. Let's cite the example of Nizhnevartovsk. In the 1960s, people of more than 100 ethnicities and religious groups came there with one single idea: to mine for oil for the good of the country. One big mission brought people together, and the North yielded. Maybe this lesson has to be learned. You cannot replicate it precisely, but you can still try. You can try to bring all of us together, because society requires consolidation. It is an objective requirement right now. And a follow-up. Let me draw your attention to the fact that this is a question about oil. But it was tweaked a little bit. Well, yes, I had to tweak it somehow. And 2018, Nizhnevartovsk is celebrating the 90th anniversary, and it is home to people who performed a heroic deed, that is, mining for oil. So maybe, so as to encourage the oil miners' heroes, award something like a prize. Other municipalities, other cities also can be awarded a special status. And the last thing, the veterans have asked for your signature to celebrate the 90th anniversary of the Nizhnevartovsk region, and just a couple of words as a wish. And there are some sheets of paper on your table. Dmitry Sergeyevich is here. I'm certainly going to write down something for you, and you and he are going to meet afterwards, and he'll pass it to you. Now, as a follow-up to your question, you asked about oil, something. Yes, give the mic, please. And afterwards, Afghanistan. They're going to hold the mic for you. Introduce yourself, please. About Sametlor. Introduce yourself. My name is Margarita Pavchenko from the Vedomosti newspaper. Thank you very much for the preference for watered deposits, but unfortunately it was only given to Sametlor, even though many companies were asking for that. Many small deposits inundated with water required these preferences, but some selective approach kicked in, and we know who is responsible for that. That is Igor Sechin, who is bringing lawsuits against many people and companies, such as AFK System. I would hate to waste others' time, but the selective approach is so much widespread. Who is the first, the strongest, who knows you the longest, those stand to benefit. Other projects don't get anything. This is a very personal approach, isn't it? Do you think this problem exists? Do you think it is just that only Sametlor has been provided with this preference? Yes, the oil companies think they get nothing. Yes, please sit down. I'm going to answer your question. It is not Sechin who is responsible for this decision. It is Alexander Novak. These decisions are not made just out of the blue. They are taken once the profitability of this or that oil mine has been assessed. It is up to the Energy Ministry to come up with these decisions. Yes, I do sign them, but it is up to the Energy Ministry and the Economic Development Ministry. And these decisions are based on objective criteria, the profitability, the level of water inundation. Maybe you are right, I don't know, but you've got to talk to the ministry. You don't have to apply to the administration, even though we do have an economic department there that is headed by Andrei Ivanovich. It is very efficient, and there are many wonderful professionals working there. We'll try to have a look at it, but not in terms of those who received something. Now, as for Sametlor and Rosneft, the administration thinks it's a just proposal, and other proposals first have to be worked through at the government, by the Energy Ministry, as well as the Economic Development Ministry, and we are willing to support that. Afghanistan, as promised. Where is Afghanistan? Yes, please, the floor is yours. And children next. Afghan News Agency. Just recently, you and Donald Trump had a telephone conversation in the course of which you talked about the state of affairs in Afghanistan, and in particular the recrudescence of the terrorist threat and the drug threat. In that context, I would like to know your assessment of the prospects for interacting with the United States and countering these kinds of threats in Afghanistan. This is one of the tracks which we could indeed pursue, pulling our efforts together with the United States. And should we be able to forge this joint work, then our efforts would be more efficient. We are seeing a looming, impending threat emanating from international terrorists in Afghanistan. We see radical armed units seizing an increasing number of regions in the north of Afghanistan and the borders with former Soviet republics such as Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. Certainly, we're hugely concerned about that because our military base 201 is located in Tajikistan. We also have an aviation base in Kyrgyzstan. We are closely following these processes. And as we can see, the central government in Kabul requires international support, which we are willing to provide, just as we were in the previous years, in particular in training national professionals in the armed forces and law enforcement agencies. We are also willing to provide military equipment and arms. Without economic support, Afghanistan also will hardly be able to address the tasks such as those related to drugs and the drug production. Unfortunately, the territory of Afghanistan is the territory where the largest number of drugs in the world is produced. A great number of them, a great share, flows into the Russian market, and we're certainly concerned about that. So together with the government of Afghanistan and other interested governments are willing to work together to overcome all the difficulties. Now, moving on to the children. Here in the left, someone wanted to ask a question about children. Save the children. Let me introduce myself. My name is Sergei Chesnikov, Information Agency, Ivan Chai. Mr. President, I'm curious to know if you know, Mr. President, that recently 1 million signatures was brought to your administration to protect children pre-birth, because there is a discrimination on an age basis. Until children are born, they're not protected by the law. So I'm very curious to know about that, but I've got another question. The pro-life movement that garnered these signatures throughout Russia, I mean the prohibition of abortions? Yes, they are supporting women, and we ask them how much does it cost to raise a child in Russia, and it turns out it ranges from 7 to 20,000 rubles per region. That is how much it costs to save the life of a child. Your wonderful initiative of sending 10,000 rubles is much cheaper. So my question is whether the government is going to provide support to such non-commercial organizations. The pro-life movement unites more than 300 organizations, NGOs from across Russia, 400 cities, 69 regions. Is the government going to support the non-commercial organizations of this sector? Just a moment. So as not to waste our time, I'm going to try to answer you in detail. I would like to thank you for this question. It is not by coincidence that I brought these papers. I said that at the meeting at the Kremlin, and I like to reiterate that word for word here. Please, sit down. First, as for the ban on abortions, as you know, in the modern world, and the overwhelming number of countries, these decisions are up to the woman herself. And why is that? Because there is a huge concern that should there be an absolute ban on abortions, then criminal abortions are going to pop up in huge numbers. It is not a discussion, it's a question and answer, but I'm willing to engage in a discussion with you. Sometimes from countries where abortions are banned, women go abroad to have an abortion, or there are criminal abortions made in a clandestine manner, and it can deal a terrible blow to mothers, to their health. The mortality rates soar. So one has to be very cautious. One has to understand the overall mood in society, to understand the moral and ethic norms. You cannot simply break the current customs. What you are doing to support women who decide to save a child or not, well, if they want to save a child and help them, that is wonderful. And I'm willing to do everything in my power to support this part of what you're doing, you and the other organizations that you mentioned. As for supporting the institution of family, of childhood and maternity, I did indeed waited for a question just like this, and so I'd like to avail myself of this opportunity to say once again what we want to do to help our demographic trends. First, a monthly payment which is paid until the child is 18 months old. It is going to stand in the amount of the minimum wage, and it is going to be provided to the families of certain categories. That means it's going to be 10,523, and in 2019, 10,836, and in 2020, more than 11,000. The maternity capital program is also going to be extended, and there are going to be more opportunities for the use of the maternity capital. The maternity capital will be given as a monthly payment if the second child is born until the child reaches the age of 18 months. And the maternity capital can be used to pay for preschool education since the child has reached 2 years. This is to give an opportunity for the woman to get back to her work as soon as possible, not to lose her qualification. Third, as you know, there are 50 regions that get monthly benefits for the third child and the subsequent child until they are 3 years old. So as part of the redistribution of the system and tweaking it, we are going to raise the number of the regions up to 60. And fourth, we are introducing a subsidy for the interest rate on mortgage. Right now it stands at 10 to 12%. Everything superior to 6% is going to be subsidized by the government. And this norm is going to be introduced starting from January the 1st, 2018, and it's going to be in effect until the 31st of December 2022. The terms of subsidizing are going to be 3 years, and 5 years after the third lending has been provided, and it's going to help 500,000 Russian families. And also a new program is going to be introduced to create new places for kindergartens and creche to provide 100% accessibility to preschool education. The number of places to be created is 626,000. This is all going to be done to support the families with low income and to improve our demographics.
Mr. President, we're live for 3.5 hours, and at 4 o'clock we have... Well, hold on. Please give the mic to this person. Save the children.
Zalina
Ataeva, Grozny TV channel. First and foremost, Mr. President, I would like to express gratitude from my compatriots who were liberated from the conflict zones according to your orders. As you talked before, Ramzan Kadyrov is doing this great work by your order. About 100 people, including citizens of Russia and Kazakhstan, were liberated. Recently, there are so-called experts who are saying that it should not be done. I would like to learn your position in this regard. Should we give the chance for mothers and their children to get back to normal life? How important is this work for our country? This work is very right. It's very important. There is no doubt. There could be no doubt here. What Mr. Kadyrov is doing is a very noble cause, and it should be done. Children who were brought to the conflict zones did not make this decision to leave, and we cannot leave them behind there. I think that he's doing everything right, and we'll continue to support him and help him. Let's do it. Yeah, Vladivostok, please. Yes, hold on. Good afternoon, Mr. President. Sergei Milyut, Prima Media, Vladivostok. We all respect you and we love you. You always come out of Vladivostok. It's your favorite city. Well, know that. Please hold on entire. I'll be brief. The year of environment is coming to an end. And Mr. President, please pay attention to Vladivostok. It seems that it did not even start. They're cutting down parks and dirty shores, and they're cutting down forests. But right now, school recreation camps are being privatized, and they are done by private hands. So, Mr. President, I would like to ask you, could you please help us retain some 19,000 hectares to preserve it? What kind of hectares are these? This is the protected forest zone. This is a protected environmental zone in Sakharny Kluch, in the suburbs of the city. Now we have a new general urban plan for Vladivostok, and it is planned to be adopted. So we have the situation. I'm right now doing civil initiatives, and it seems that all the forests and the Red Book forests are being cut down to build cottages. But you see, cottages are already built, and right now they want to legalize them by changing the zone from recreational zone to a different zone. So you understand what's happening. Please help us save these trees. And 14,000 city parks. I also would like to ask you about military cities. 30,000 children. They're suffocating. We have a garbage burning plant, and we cannot help the situation with the air. The filters came from Norway, from somewhere else, but it is smoke, and our children are suffocating. I'm sorry, colleagues. That'll be the last question. Please help us, Mr. President. I would like to ask you about 19,000 hectares and the situation with the garbage burning plant. And the most important thing, there is no sports gym for children. I'm from the city of Vladivostok, and as the citizen of that city, I would like to ask you to help us in these issues. And civil society is dealing with that and cannot solve this issue. Thank you very much. Hold on a second. Well, listen. The colleague asked a question. I have to respond, right? Please, be reasonable. As a president, to the president, I would like to say this. The first thing, the program of the Far Eastern Hectare is developing and showing quite good results. We have 120,000 applications, and we have 30,000 contracts signed. We also have an idea for the compatriots living abroad to give them such an opportunity to acquire a hectare of land in the Far East. Second, we allowed to purchase such a hectare not only for Far Eastern dwellers but also for the people from other regions of the Russian Federation, and will continue to do that. Indeed, the Far East has made a quantum leap over the past 10 years. It is incredible. Vladivostok is a different city now. Still, that is not enough, and we will continue to invest in growth. When I was talking about the quantum leap, I mean a new airport, new roads, the Far Eastern Federal University on Ruski Island, and 2 wonderful bridges. And Far Eastern people were dreaming about that 100 years ago, and now we have built it. Right now we have 1 or 2 bridges. They're even now presented on the banknotes. Now, as for the issue that you have mentioned, indeed, it seems that it is there. Because under the guise of implementation of this project, sometimes the lands with them, which are part of the forest industry, they're being allocated, and this is illegal. We have to deal with that. But Vladivostok is so far away from the capital, and as always in Russia, we're talking that it's too high to get to God and too far from the Tsar. So I don't want to say this thing, but I have to. This is the deep criminalization of the region. This goes for the fish, for the forest, and for other spheres in economy. But step by step, we'll clean house and bring everyone to their senses, which is necessary for a normal life. Snegovaya Pod, this garbage burning plant, I think I'll deal with that. And about the sports gym, yes, that too, we'll deal with it. I already talked about the 600 square meters.
Давайте, Kazakhstan.
Kazakhstan, please. Hold on. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. President. My name is Ayder. I'm the editor-in-chief of Paryas magazine. Recently, you talked about the EU showing good figures of growth, and recently I took an interview of the head of a research center, and I can say not everything is so fine as you're probably being told. The growth is a little more modest, and I can tell you why. Large companies, state projects and so on, they're doing good, but the small and medium enterprises don't know about the good preferences from YAS because I don't know, there is no radio channels or TV channels, the magazine that I have created, but still, Mr. President, are we going to have a certain support program for Eurasian Economic Union? This has nothing to do with the European sanctions. The idea to create a Eurasian Economic Union belongs to the President of Kazakhstan, to Mr. Nazarbayev, and it was created long before any difficulties in our countries in the economic sphere, long before any sanctions. This has to do with the internal need to advance development in economy and the social sphere in our countries, and to use the competitive edge that we have inherited from previous times, joint infrastructure, joint energy landscape, the capability to speak Russian to each other, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of competitive advantages that each of our countries have. If we join our efforts, then it's all possible. So it is indeed the right direction that we should follow. As for that was the answer to whether it's right or wrong. As I said, the GDP, joint GDP growth of Eurasian Economic Union is 1.8 percentage points, which is higher than in Russia. This is cold, hard facts, so this is the basis for that. Secondly, I spoke about that we have increased domestic trade by 26 times. This is our common statistics, and what you are saying has nothing to do with my data. You're saying about lack of outreach to small and medium enterprises, and you're entirely correct. This indeed is the case. But what do we need to do to overcome these difficulties? To give people a chance to have a wider view of what we gain from our integration. First and foremost, we have to introduce high-tech technologies to exchange information and to support such media as yours. But let us think what we can do to support you. We have a TV channel called Mirror World. Maybe it's not enough, but I think it's quite interesting. We need to create one of the courses of our future joint work is information technologies, and right now we're doing a common algorithm, not only in trading oil and gas or transportation network, but common algorithm for information technologies, which is a crucial sphere. I, together with my colleagues, have discussed it, and maybe at the end of the month we're going to get together again and have an informal discussion. Maybe we'll gather within a CIS informal meeting, and together with our colleagues from Eurasian Economic Union, we can talk about it. On this path, we can overcome the difficulties that you have mentioned right now. Mr. President, at 4 o'clock, you have a meeting with the heroes of Russia. Please do not be cross with me. I would like to congratulate you all with the coming holiday of New Year. Indeed, we have to finish this. I wanted to talk to you, to have a discussion. However strongly I wanted to do that, I indeed want to talk to you, but please do not be cross. We'll try to see each other in certain format. I would like to congratulate you with the New Year. I wish you all the best, well-being to you, to your loved ones, and Merry Christmas to those of you who celebrated. Happy New Year to our all country, to the whole media corps. We hear you. I would like to ensure you that we hear you. We highly evaluate the role and the significance of media in the Russian life, and let us hope they will constructively cooperate in the future years. Thank you very much.
Марки заберем на память.